The desert had many ways of swallowing sound. Sometimes it did it gently, the dunes drinking in a caravan's laughter until only the creak of leather remained. Other times it did it with a roar of storm and sand, so loud that it wrapped around the world and left ears ringing for days. But this afternoon, the desert was simply quiet. Sahira Namir knelt in the shade of a tattered canvas awning, her knees pressed into hard-packed sand, a wax tablet balanced on her lap. The ruins hulked before her, half-buried arches of sun-bleached stone and shards of carved pillars rising out of the dune like the ribs of some long-dead beast. She squinted as she carefully sketched a fragment of script, copying each looping curve with the precision of someone who knew that one misplaced line could change a meaning entirely. "Your nose is going to peel off if you keep it in the sun like that," Ehani Sarif called from behind her. Sahira hid a smile and glanced over her shoulder. Ehani stood with her arms crossed, short and sturdy in her layered linen robes, a strip of bright indigo cloth wrapped around her hair. A rolled map was tucked beneath one arm. Behind her, the rest of the caravan camp was a cluster of tents and tethered camels, dusty and sun-drenched. "My nose is in the shade," Sahira said mildly. "I checked." "Your stubbornness isn't." Ehani stepped closer, boots crunching over scattered stones. "Have you at least had water?" Sahira held up her half-empty skin without taking her eyes off the carved fragment. The script was unlike anything she'd seen in her years poring over scrolls in Kasira's moving archives. It curled and wove like wind tracks over dunes, the lines so shallow they were almost invisible unless the light struck them just so. "I think it's pre-Concord," she murmured, mostly to herself. "Maybe even older. The phrasing, this part here, it's like the invocations on the Almari tablets, but the structure is—" "Going to make your brain fry as thoroughly as your skin," Ehani finished. "Write your notes and then come eat. The cooks managed dates today, fresh ones." That earned Ehani a genuine smile. "Bribery? From you?" Desperation. Ehani's mouth softened. "You've been hunched over that stone since dawn, Sahira. Even zealots take breaks." "I'm not a zealot." "Of course not. Zealots talk about their passion less." Sahira laughed quietly, then rose, stretching her sore back. The ruined arch rose above them, etched with swirling patterns that had once been painted in vivid colors. Time and sand had stripped them bare, but something of their grace lingered. The desert was full of bones like these, old cities, older temples, hints that the world had once been thick with more than human footsteps. Djinn, she thought, tracing the air where a carving had been worn away. The word itself tasted like story and smoke. Her grandmother had told her tales of them, beings of sand and flame, made of the same breath as storms, dangerous, capricious, powerful. Beautiful, in a way, stories made everything beautiful from a safe distance. "You're thinking of them again," Ehani said quietly. Sahira blinked. "Who?" "The ones in the stories. You get that look." Ehani tapped her own cheek, half longing, half skepticism. "It's a very particular expression." "It's just that all the written records stop short," Sahira said, unable to help herself. "There are references to the veiled ones and those who walked between grains of sand, but never directly. It's as if someone scrubbed their names away." "Or as if they lived only in grandmother's tales," Ehani said. "Some things leave no bones." Sahira looked back at the half-buried ruins, at the way the harsh sun painted everything in sharp contrasts. No bones. No proof that Djinn had ever been more than myth. Yet the fragment in her hand told a different story. The script spiraled around a central symbol, not a word, but an arrangement of interlocking star shapes, a seal. It hummed in her thoughts with a sort of restrained tension, as though it wanted to be understood. "I don't think that's true," Sahira said softly. "There are marks. We just haven't learned how to read them yet." Ehani's gaze lingered on her. "Careful, little hawk. Curiosity is a good slave and a dangerous master." "I'll tame it," Sahira said with a small smile. "Just don't let it drag you behind it," Ehani sighed. "Come, before Ramil eats all the dates out of sheer pettiness." At the mention of Ramil, Sahira's mouth thinned. "Is he still complaining about the excavation grid?" "When is Ramil not complaining?" Ehani shrugged. "He thinks we should move the tents closer to the ruins. I think he should consult the last expedition that tried that and was buried in sand up to their eyebrows. Tragically, they are not available." Sahira snorted. The wind rose and tugged at her headscarf, carrying with it the dry, baked scent of dunes and distant spice. As they walked back toward camp, she glanced once more over her shoulder at the ruins, the arch, the scattered stones, the partially unearthed pillar that lay like a slumbering beast. The afternoon light caught on something dark embedded in the sand near its base, a gleam of obsidian. Her steps slowed. "Sahira?" Ehani asked. "I'll join you in a moment," Sahira said. "I need to mark something while the light is right." Ehani followed her gaze, then sighed with long-suffering affection. "If you aren't at the fire in half an hour, I'm sending a camel to drag you." "Camels don't drag," Sahira called after her. "They sulk." "Then I'll pick one that sulks in your direction," Ehani retorted. Sahira's smile lingered as she retraced her steps and made her way back to the pillar half uncovered at the heart of the site. It was carved from a single piece of obsidian, its glassy surface dulled by centuries of sand. Only a quarter of it was visible, jutting from the ground at a canted angle, as if the earth itself had tried to swallow it and failed. Most of its surface was blank, reflective. But along one side, where Sahira's team had brushed away sand that morning, faint lines ran across it like frozen cracks in ice. No, not cracks, script. She knelt in front of it, brushing sand away with careful, calloused fingers. It was cooler than the surrounding stone, the desert heat refusing to cling to its smooth face. The lines sharpened as she cleared them, forming not the looping calligraphy of Aradhem, but something sharper and more angular, built of intersecting strokes. At first glance, it appeared chaotic. Then she saw the pattern. The lines spiraled inward, narrowing into a circle about the size of her palm. Within that circle, a cluster of tiny symbols formed a starburst. A seal, just like on the earlier fragment, but here it was whole. She swallowed, pulse quickening. "You're beautiful," she whispered to the pillar, ridiculous as it sounded. Carefully, she took out her wax tablet and stylus, copying each stroke with painstaking accuracy. The desert's quiet pressed around her, broken only by the distant calls of traders and the soft chink of camel tack. The more she copied, the more her skin prickled. The script wasn't just decorative. It repeated certain phrases, layered them. The words for binding, for sleep, for oath. And, interwoven among them, a term she had only ever seen in half-burned scrolls, miscopied and argued over by scholars. Naru Saha, the foreseen one. Prophecy, she breathed. So, it is a seal. Her heart did a peculiar little stutter. For a wild moment, she imagined Ehani's face when Sahira brought her a full transcription. The archivists in Kasira would argue about this for years. They would copy it, debate it, write treatises. Her name might sit in the margins of those scrolls. Sahira Namir, first scribe of the Kasira obsidian pillar. The thought warmed her more than the sun. She finished etching the last marks and leaned close, squinting at a particularly intricate knot of lines. The central symbol was recessed, carved a few finger widths into the stone, as if something once sat there and had been taken away. Her fingertips grazed the hollow. A tiny spark leaped beneath her skin. Not heat, not cold. Something like the feeling of standing at the edge of a dune above a steep drop, knowing that one more step would send you sliding. She snatched her hand back, heart tripping. For a moment, the world sharpened. The whisper of wind, the hiss of sand against glass, the faint hum in her bones, as if a string inside her had been plucked. She almost called for Ahani. Instead, she flexed her fingers slowly. The sensation faded. "It's old magic," she murmured, steadying her breath. "Nothing more. Sealed. Dormant." The sensible thing would have been to mark the location, retreat, and bring Ahani and the others back with proper precautions. The sensible thing was Ahani's voice in her ear. "Curiosity is a good slave and a dangerous master." Sahira stared at the hollow in the stone, at the script that spoke of binding, sleep, a foreseen one. "Dormant," she repeated, as if saying it aloud made it true. She took out a brush, wetting it with a little water. If she could darken the lines, she might see them more clearly without touching. The brush slid into the hollow and tapped the recessed seal. Sound rushed back into the world in a single inverted breath. The wind died. The murmur of the camp fell to silence. The world held itself still. Sahira's heart pounded against a sudden pressure in the air, as if the desert were inhaling. The hairs along her arms rose. Her brush hand trembled. Then the seal flared. Light shot through the etched lines, a pale gold that had nothing to do with the sun. It ran along each stroke like quicksilver, racing outward from the central hollow to the edges of the inscription. Where it passed, the glassy obsidian seemed to thin, to become something less like stone and more like liquid shadow. "No," Sahira whispered. "No, I didn't." The ground shuddered beneath her knees. Sand slid away from the pillar as if poured from an invisible bowl. The awning behind her snapped in the sudden wind, cloth flapping wildly. "Sahira!" someone shouted faintly from the camp. The seal's golden light reached the outermost ring and burst upward in a column, a silent explosion that punched through the air. Sahira threw up her arms, but there was no heat, no burning, only the sensation of something vast and old uncoiling from a long, cramped sleep. The world went white. For a long moment she knew nothing but weightlessness. A roaring filled her ears, though she wasn't sure whether it was sound or her own blood trying to catch up with what was happening. She felt sand lift beneath her, falling away like water. Then she was on her back, staring at the sky. The sky was wrong. It was no longer the hard, flat blue of midday, but a swirling vault of deep indigo lit by countless stars, as if night had fallen in the span of a heartbeat. The stars wheeled slowly, forming patterns she didn't recognize, then blurred, melting back into pale daylight. Sahira gasped and rolled to her side, coughing as sand trickled from her hair and robes. Around her, the camp was a chaos of shouts and scrambling feet. Tents flapped, camels bawled, someone was swearing colorfully in 3 dialects at once. At the center of it all, where the obsidian pillar had once jutted from the sand, something stood. At first, Sahira thought it was a column of smoke stirred by a dust devil. It rose taller than any man, its contours shifting like drifting dunes. The air around it shimmered, veiling the figure in a heat haze that made her eyes water. Then it stepped forward. The shape condensed into a tall, broad-shouldered form, shadow cut from the color of onyx. Sand eddied around its bare feet. As she stared, the haze thinned further, outlines sharpening into details. A loose, sleeveless robe that flickered like mirage glass, a belt that looked woven from strands of starlight, and a face. His features were too symmetrical to be called handsome in a human way, but they were compelling, carved with the kind of precision no sculptor could match. High cheekbones, a strong jaw, a straight nose. His eyes were pools of molten gold, without pupil or sclera, glowing softly from within. His hair fell around his shoulders in a rippling cascade that shifted in color between dark sand and storm clouds. Every instinct in Sahira screamed that this was not a man. The figure looked down at his hands, flexing fingers that seemed to be made of light and shadow braided together. His mouth twitched, first in confusion, then in something like wonder. He inhaled deeply, chest rising. "Air," he murmured. His voice was low and resonant, carrying easily over the clamor of the camp. Real air, grains, heat, stars beneath my feet. The wind gusted again, tugging at Sahira's headscarf, sending sand skittering across the ground. She realized, with a distant sort of detached horror, that the obsidian pillar was gone, swallowed entirely. Only a smooth hollow remained, a shallow bowl in the sand where it had stood for who knows how many centuries. Ihani skidded to a halt beside Sahira, breathless. Her hand fell to Sahira's shoulder, fingers digging in hard enough to hurt. "Tell me," she said, perfectly calm, "that you did not just unseal whatever that is." Sahira opened her mouth. Nothing came out. The figure turned toward them with slow deliberation, as if adjusting to the idea that other beings existed. His gaze swept over the camp, the scattered ruins, the wide eye of the sky. The golden irises brightened when they settled on Sahira. The sensation of being seen dropped through her like a stone in a well. Not looked at, seen, as if every layer of her thoughts, her fears, her hopes were pages in a book laid open. He began walking toward her. Several of the laborers stumbled back, clutching tools or shards of stone as if they might be weapons. Ramel appeared from behind a toppled stack of crates, hair in disarray, face pale. "Stay back," someone shouted. "Don't let it near the camels." Sahira couldn't move. Her sandal pressed into the familiar give of sand, yet she felt as if she stood on the edge of that unseen dune again, one step away from sliding into something she could never climb out of. The figure stopped a few arm lengths away. Up close, his presence was even more overwhelming. The air around him held the scent of hot stone after rain and distant spices burning on a brazier. When he spoke, his words brushed the inside of her skull like a remembered lullaby in a language she had never learned. "Naru saw," he said. Her brain, which had so helpfully catalogued every mark on the pillar, decided to catalogue this too. His voice wrapped around the word, turning it into something both reverent and startled. "That term is classified," Sahira heard herself say faintly, because her tongue had a mind of its own. "It appears only in pre-Concord inscriptions related to binding prophecies, and I am talking too much." He smiled. It was a small thing, that smile, barely a curve of his mouth, yet it shifted his entire face, taking it from otherworldly to something almost human, almost warm. "You speak the old edges of the language," he said. "I did not expect that. The sands have turned many times." "Who are you?" Ahini demanded. Her voice was strained, but she stepped forward, slightly ahead of Sahira. "Name yourself, spirit." He inclined his head slightly, as if acknowledging an equal. "I am Razan, once of the third celestial well, bound to the sands between. Djinn, as you would call it." Murmurs rippled through the onlookers. Someone choked on a curse. Ramil's eyes shone with a mixture of terror and hunger that made Sahira's skin crawl. "Djinn," Razan had said, as if announcing he was a traitor or musician. "You are not supposed to exist," Sahira said before she could stop herself. His brows flared in amusement. How fortunate for me that reality does not rely on your expectations, Naru-sa. Do not call her that, Ehini snapped. He looked between them, then focused wholly on Sahira again. The intensity of his gaze made her throat dry. You are the one who woke the seal, he said. The lines recognized you. Your touch shifted the final circle. The starlight twisted. I felt it. I brushed some dust away, Sahira said. It was an accident. Accidents, he said softly, are how fate hides its hand. She bristled. I do not believe in fate. Ah. His smile deepened, but there was something almost gentle in it. Then we are at a disadvantage from the first word. Ramil found his tongue. You are a djinn. The words came out reverent and greedy. Your power. Are you bound to a token, to a vessel? Can your magic be studied, harnessed? Razan's gaze slid to him. In an instant, the air temperature seemed to plummet. The soft golden light in his eyes hardened. I was bound, he said, for centuries upon centuries to that shard of obsidian, my essence penned in lines of law. Now the seal is broken, and I am mostly free. Mostly? Sahira repeated warily. Razan turned back to her, and the air warmed again. The bond remains. The what? You touched the seal, he said, as if it were obvious. You woke me. The prophecy spun around your name long before you breathed, but your choice, your hand, your presence completed the circle. I followed that thread to the surface. That is not an explanation, Sahira said. That is a riddle. It is both. He studied her, head tilting slightly. You are as the starlight described. Dark eyes that see the bones of things, a mind that questions, a heart that— Enough, Ehani cut in. If you must speak in riddles, do it somewhere else. You are standing in the middle of my excavation, and I still do not know if you intend to harm anyone. Razan blinked slowly. Harm? He looked around again. You are scholars. You unearthed what had been covered. Why would I harm you? Because you are a djinn, one of the laborers blurted. Djinn trick people. They twist words. They— Stories, Razan said. Shadows of shadows. Whatever the tales say, I will not harm any under the protection of the Naru-sa. Sahira flinched. Stop saying that. It is your title. It is superstition. Her voice sharpened. Calm slipped away, replaced by a familiar stubbornness that had served her well in dusty archives and heated debates. Words carved into stone by people who could not bear the idea that life is not pre-written? I am not anyone's foretold anything. The camp had gone almost completely quiet. Every eye watched this strange standoff between scholar and djinn. Razan's expression shifted. For a heartbeat, something like hurt flickered through his gaze, startled, unguarded. Then it smoothed again, into a careful neutrality. I will not force you, he said quietly. I am newly freed, not a monster. But understand this. When the seal broke, the balance trembled. My essence is unsettled. He flexed his fingers again. They seemed less solid for a moment, edges blurring. If it is not anchored, storms will rise. The sands between will fray. The guardians will wake. Guardians? Sahira repeated, a bit faintly. As in constructs of old law and stone, Razan said, bound to ensure that the prophecy proceeds. They will come seeking to correct any deviation. And you're saying I caused this? She said. You and whoever decided that my prison should last until starlight named a bride. His mouth quirked. Prophecies never account for personalities. They are terribly inconvenienced by people who say no. Ehani's hand tightened on Sahira's shoulder. What do you want from her? Razan looked back at Sahira, and this time there was no overwhelm in his gaze, no flare of power, only an earnestness she hadn't expected. I need time, he said simply. Time to regain enough stability to return to or to the celestial oasis where essence is mended. To do that without tearing the desert apart, I must anchor to something strong. The seal chose you. I do not fully understand how, but I feel the tether. Sahira's heart thudded. Anchor, she said slowly. As in, I will remain close to you until my essence steadies, he said. Your presence is a fulcrum. The bond aligns with you. It is not chains. It is proximity, resonance. He paused. And there is the matter of the prophecy itself. It names you as my Narusa, my foretold bride. The word bride seemed to explode in the air. Sahira stared at him. Someone choked on their water. Another dropped a crate. Ehani made a sound that might have described several unscholarly phrases at once. I beg your pardon? Sahira said at last, very calmly. The term is specific, Razan said, oblivious to the quiet chaos behind her. Not merely companion or ally. It denotes a bond of twined essences, a partnership of life. Marriage, in your tongue, though the concept is older than your contracts. The prophecy says, I do not care what the prophecy says, Sahira snapped. He stopped. I am not, she continued, going to marry someone I just accidentally excavated from an obsidian pillar. Understanding flickered behind his eyes. You object to the swiftness, not the concept. I object to all of it, she said. The swiftness, the prophecy, the assumption that my life is some puzzle piece fitting into a pattern carved by people who died centuries ago. I object to having my future decided by a rock. Razan considered this, then gave a small, slow nod. Good, he said. She blinked. Good? Good that you object. His mouth curved again. The starlight spoke of a woman who would not bend easily. If you had simply accepted, I would be more suspicious. That is the most unreasonable compliment I've ever received, Sahira muttered. I will not force your choice, he said. Whatever the prophecy names, I do not desire a bond born of compulsion. But the threat remains. My essence is still unstable. If I drift without anchor, storms will worsen. The guardians will come sooner. They will not care for your objections. So what do you propose? Ehani asked tightly. Razan drew a breath, visibly steadying the way his form flickered. For a moment, his arms blurred into wind, then firmed back into a more human shape. Travel with me, he said. His gaze stayed on Sahira. Only for a time. To the celestial oasis where the wells converge. If I can reach it, I can mend the imbalance. The tether between us will keep my presence from tearing holes in your world on the journey. You think we can just walk to the place where Djinn fix themselves? As if it is a marketplace in Khasira? Razan's lips twitched. It is not a marketplace. There are fewer haggling disputes. Razan, Sahira said carefully, tasting his name. Has it occurred to you that I am a scholar? My work is here, my notes, my duties. I cannot simply vanish into the desert chasing star wells. You can, he said softly. You may not want to, but you can. That simple statement landed more heavily than any grand argument. For all that she grew prickly when anyone called her stubborn, Sahira had carved her life into careful routines. Excavation seasons, archive seasons, work, parchment, ink. But the desert had its own ways of carving. She looked past Razan to the campers. Some watched with barely concealed fascination. Others gripped their belongings and animals, poised to flee at the slightest hint of threat. Ramil had stopped pretending to be concerned for anyone but himself. He was staring at Razan with naked calculation, already imagining what papers he could write, what prestige he could claim. And above it all, the sky was too clear. The silence after the seal's breaking still lingered, an absence where natural wind should have been. What happens if I refuse everything? Sahira asked quietly. "If I stay here, continue my notes, and you go to this oasis alone?" He hesitated. That, more than anything, told her he was not entirely the arrogant immortal she had imagined Djinn to be. If he had lied easily, she would have known where she stood. "The bond will still tug on us," he said. "I can go, but my path will drag storms across the desert, pulling at the tether between us. It will hurt you, it will hurt the people you are with. And the guardians will hunt the break in the prophecy, both ends of it, you and me." Her stomach knotted. "So, my choices are, accept a ridiculous prophecy and an accidental engagement, or doom the caravan." He winced. "When you say it that way, it sounds unrefined." "It is unrefined." He lifted his hands. "Then we refine it. We unbind what we can. We challenge the pattern. Come with me, not as a bride, but as a scholar, as the one who understands runes." His gaze searched her face. "Help me find a way to rewrite what was written, to make it so that if you choose any bond, it is truly your choice. And if you choose none, the desert still stands." The idea struck through her like lightning. Not the part about traveling with a djinn, that was still terrifying, even if his eyes were very distracting. But the thought of unpicking a prophecy, of finding the seams in a system everyone assumed was fixed, that sang to the part of her that had spent nights stubbornly re-inked over faded letters just to see what lay beneath. "Prophecies do not bend," she said half-heartedly. "Everything bends," Razan said quietly. "Even starlight, even stone." Ehani stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Sahira, Little Hawk, I cannot pretend this is not dangerous. It is. You would be traveling with a being every tale warns us about, to a place no mortal has walked in generations. But I also cannot ignore what I felt when the seal broke. Something shifted. If we do nothing, we risk the storms and the guardians and Ramil trying to bottle a djinn's essence in a jar," Sahira finished bleakly. Ramil, sensing his name, bristled. "I would never be so foolish without extensive tests." Sahira pinched the bridge of her nose. "You always wanted to see the older markers for yourself," Ehani said gently, "to follow the paths only hinted at in scrolls. I've seen you stare at maps like a pilgrim before a shrine. If there is anyone I trust to walk into the unknown and argue with destiny itself, it is you." "And if I don't come back?" Sahira asked. Ehani's throat worked. "Then I will curse the stars," she said, "and I will remember that you walked a path you chose." Razan was watching the two of them with an expression Sahira couldn't quite read. There was something like awe in it. "I will bring you back," he said quietly, "or I will fade trying." She looked at him sharply. "Is that supposed to reassure me?" "No, it is supposed to be honest," he said. "The oasis is not a promise. It is a chance. A chance to reshape something as rigid as prophecy. A chance to understand the magic that had haunted the edges of Sahira's studies for years. A chance to stop whatever storms she could already feel gathering on the horizon, where the line between sand and sky seemed sharper than it had that morning." She exhaled slowly. "I am not your bride," she said. "Not now, and perhaps not ever." Something unreadable flickered behind his eyes. "Understood." "I will not let a stone or a star decide my life," she continued. "If any bond happens, it will be because I choose it, with a clear head, after time. That," he said with soft conviction, "is the only kind of bond worth having." She swallowed, the words settling inside her like a small, solid weight. "But I am a scholar," she went on, "and I will not pretend I am not intensely interested in the workings of a prophecy that can be challenged at all." For the first time since the pillar had cracked open, she let herself turn fully toward the unknown. I will come with you to this celestial oasis, she said, as your anchor, and as the one who will find a way to untangle this. I will help you fix the imbalance, for the sake of the desert, for the people in it. And because I am not letting fate win an argument without hearing its reasons. Razan's smile was small and luminous. Then I am in your debt, Sahira Namir. I didn't do it for you, she said, a little too quickly. I did it for the desert. And yet, he said, inclining his head, I am still in your debt. The wind, which had been unnaturally still, stirred again. It moved cautiously at first, as if wary of being noticed, then more freely, brushing Sahira's cheeks and picking at the edges of her clothes. Somewhere in the distance, a low rumble rolled across the dunes. Gather what you need, Razan said. We must leave before the guardians trace the seals breaking to this place. Travel with a caravan if you wish. They will be safer under the shelter of our tether than left behind to face the storms alone. Ihani's hand fell away from Sahira's shoulder, only to grab her in a sudden brief hug. Pack lightly, she murmured into Sahira's ear. Ink, parchment, common sense, in that order. Sahira clung back for a heartbeat before pulling away. You'll stay with the caravan? I'll see them safely to Khasira, Ihani said. I'll keep your notes locked in the archive and throw Ramil into a well if he tries to steal them. Hey, Ramil protested. You'll write, Ihani continued, ignoring him. If there is a way to do so that doesn't summon more jinn. I'll try, Sahira said. She turned to Razan. He stood tall amidst the disordered camp, a figure of shadow and starlight in the harsh afternoon sun. Yet there was something almost uncertain in the set of his shoulders, as if he were still finding his edges. Can you look less like a desert legend and more like a man? She asked abruptly. His brows rose. You dislike my current form? It is very, she gestured helplessly, conspicuous and unnerving. People will panic if you stroll into a caravan camp glowing. He considered this. Then I will adjust. His outline blurred, the edges of his form dissolving into fine sand grains that whirled in a tight spiral. Light flickered within the cloud, dimming and reshaping. Sahira squinted, trying to track the changes, but they moved too swiftly. Broad shoulders narrowing slightly, glowing eyes shading toward a rich amber, hair settling into dark waves that looked almost tangible. The sand settled. A man stood where the jinn had been. Taller than most in the camp, yes, but not absurdly so. He had deeply tanned skin, dark hair that fell to his shoulders, and eyes the color of warm honey, their glow muted to a faint inner ring. His clothes had shifted into a long, dust-colored robe belted at the waist, suitable for desert travel. Only a faint shimmer at the edges of his silhouette hinted at anything unnatural. He flexed his fingers, looking at them with faint bemusement. Does this suffice? Sahira stared. You look like you walked out of a romantic ballad. His lips twitched. I aimed for ordinary. You missed. He inclined his head, amusement lingering. I will study your caravans and adjust further then. For now, consider this, a compromise between your comfort and my vanity. She snorted despite herself. The sound seemed to loosen something in her chest. Around them, life in the camp began to cautiously resume. People moved, spoke in low tones, checked tents and animals. The desert seemed to breathe again. Sahira gathered her wax tablets and brushes with mechanical efficiency, hands shaking only a little. Her mind raced ahead faster than her feet. Logistics, provisions, the safest caravan routes toward the deeper desert, what she knew of old maps that whispered of hidden oases and forbidden wells. She had spent years reading about other people's journeys into the unknown. Now, unexpectedly, she was walking into her own. As she turned toward her tent, Razan fell into step beside her, keeping a respectful distance of a few paces. His gaze roamed over the camp with open fascination. "Will you miss it?" he asked quietly. "This place, these routines." "Yes," she said, surprising herself with how readily the word came. "And no." He glanced at her. "I have loved my work," she said, "but I chose it in part because it felt safe. Words on paper, stones that stay where you put them. Even the dead argue less than the living." "And yet?" "And yet," he prompted gently. "And yet I have spent half my life reading about myths while telling myself they were only stories." Her mouth curved wryly. "It seems I was wrong." He smiled faintly. "Stories are embers. Truth is the flame. Sometimes you need one to find the other." "That's very poetic for someone who dislikes prophecies," she said. "Just because I dislike being used as their subject does not mean I cannot appreciate a well-turned metaphor," he replied. She shook her head, a laugh escaping her in spite of everything. Above them, the sky stretched wide and untroubled. But on the horizon, in a place too far to see, the first threads of a storm were already twisting themselves into existence, drawn to the crack that had opened between destiny and choice. Sahira did not know what waited between here and the celestial oasis, or what rewriting a prophecy would cost. She knew only that she had refused to be anyone's foretold bride, and had, in the same breath, chosen to walk beside a djinn into the heart of the desert. Curiosity, she thought, was indeed a dangerous master. She tightened her grip on her satchel, felt the familiar weight of her stylus against her palm, and took her first deliberate step into the unknown. Sahira had traveled with caravans her whole adult life, but never like this. Caravans moved with their own rhythm, slow, steady, practical. Dawn meant packing tents while the sand was still cool. Midday meant shade and water, and stories traded to pass the heat. Evenings meant cooking fires and soft laughter drifting under starlight. But now, every routine felt slightly tilted, as though the desert itself was holding its breath. Razan walked among them like a shadow learning how to cast itself. He kept to his human-shaped form, yet there were small reminders that he was not, and would never be, truly mortal. The sand never clung to his boots. His robe never wrinkled or caught on stray thorns. When someone stumbled, he was suddenly there, far faster than anyone should have been able to move, steadying them with a light touch. The caravan was grateful, wary, and deeply confused by him. Sahira understood the feeling. On their first morning traveling together, Razan stood at the edge of camp, gazing at the dunes as if reacquainting himself with an old friend. The wind tugged at the fringes of his robe, lifting dark strands of his hair. "You don't sleep," Sahira said, approaching cautiously. "I do," Razan replied, "just not in the way mortals do. Djinn drift. We rest in the movements of the air or the flicker of starlight. Essence, not flesh, recovers." "Does it help with your stability?" "Some." His amber eyes warmed as he looked at her. "But proximity helps more." She resisted the urge to take a step back. "You don't need to hover." His expression softened. "I am not hovering. I am being mindful of the tether. You're 3 paces away and staring at me like I'm a map you're terrified of losing." "A map can be remade," he murmured. "You cannot." Heat rose to Sahira's cheeks far too quickly for her liking. She turned abruptly toward her pack, pretending to check the straps. It wasn't that he flirted. Djinn didn't seem to understand flirting the way humans did. He simply said things he found true, in that deep, quiet voice that carried more weight than it should. And he looked at her with a kind of attentive reverence that made it difficult to breathe steadily. Ehani had whispered, before they parted ways, "Careful, that one will learn emotions faster than he expects." At the time, Sahira hadn't fully understood what she meant. She was beginning to. By late morning, the caravan formed a long, wavering line snaking through the dunes. Sunlight shimmered off the sand in blinding sweeps, and heat wavered in the distance like a living veil. Razan walked beside Sahira, sometimes silent, sometimes questioning. He asked endless questions. "What is the purpose of the string tied around your wrist?" "It keeps my stylus from getting lost." "Why not weave the stylus into your hair?" "Because then I'd stab myself every time I turned my head." He absorbed all of this with solemn consideration, as if she were imparting sacred wisdom. And Sahira found, unwillingly, that his curiosity amused her. Ehani had whispered, before they parted ways, "Careful, that one will learn emotions faster than he expects." At the time, Sahira hadn't fully understood what she meant. She was beginning to. By late morning, the caravan formed a long, wavering line snaking through the dunes. Sunlight shimmered off the sand in blinding sweeps, and heat wavered in the distance like a living veil. Razan walked beside Sahira, sometimes silent, sometimes questioning. He asked endless questions. "What is the purpose of the string tied around your wrist?" "It keeps my stylus from getting lost." "Why not weave the stylus into your hair?" "Because then I'd stab myself every time I turned my head." He absorbed all of this with solemn consideration, as if she were imparting sacred wisdom. And Sahira found, unwillingly, that his curiosity amused her. Around midday, when they stopped to rest beneath the low shadow of a sandstone outcrop, Razan knelt beside Sahira as she spread out her wax tablets to review her notes from the excavation. "You read the runes beautifully," Razan said, watching her stylus dance across a fresh tablet. "They're fascinating," Sahira admitted. "The seal used forms I've never seen, older than anything in the Khasira archives. The central motif, it wasn't just a prophetic mark, it was part of a containment weave." "Yes," Razan murmured. "The binding was intricate. It held me for a very long time." "Who did this to you?" she asked, before she could decide whether the question was too bold. His gaze fell to the sand. "A collective of mages and scholars. Some feared what Djinn might become. Others feared what I might become in particular." His voice was steady, but something in it grew quieter. "I was powerful." Sahira looked at him sidelong. "Are you still?" "Less," he said, with a faint smile that did not reach his eyes. "Much less, thanks to the seal. But perhaps that is a blessing. Power unchecked tends to shape the world without consent." She blinked. "That's surprisingly self-aware." "I had centuries alone with nothing but my thoughts," he replied. "It encourages self-reflection." Sahira hesitated. "You said the prophecy mentioned a bride, that the starlight named me." The words felt awkward in her mouth. "Do you truly believe it, or is it just the way Djinn interpret destiny?" Razan studied her face for a long, searching moment. "I believe fate lays out a road," he said slowly, "but I also believe most beings are very skilled at stepping off the road and climbing a cliff instead." "That sounds like something you've done." His lips curved, more than once. "And this prophecy, this idea that you and I are meant to be, is something I am choosing to challenge," he finished gently. "Even if starlight marked you, Sahira, I do not want a bride who feels cornered. Destiny should be a door, not a cage." Her chest tightened unexpectedly. "You're very poetic today." "It is the heat," he said solemnly. "It weakens my filters." She snorted, and he looked almost proud of himself for drawing that sound from her. They resumed walking in the late afternoon. The dunes glowed orange under the sinking sun, and the caravan moved in comfortable silence, mostly. Ramil stalked near the rear, muttering and jotting his own notes, occasionally sneaking glances at Razan that made Sahira's skin prickle. When he caught Sahira watching, he offered her a thin-lipped smile. "He worries me," she whispered to Razan when Ramil turned away. He should worry you, Razan replied calmly. Ambition without wisdom is a dangerous thing. You say that like it's personal. It is, he said simply. As the sun slid toward the horizon, a sudden cry went up from the front of the caravan. Sand wolves! Sahira's heart lurched. The creatures moved like ripples across the dunes, lean bodies of tawny fur and shifting sand, eyes glinting like dark glass. They circled fast, drawn by the smell of water and food. The caravan erupted into motion. Camels brayed, ropes were pulled tight, people armed themselves with hooks and staffs. Razan straightened, and the air shifted sharply. Stay behind me. I can help. Yes, he said, by staying alive. Before she could protest, one of the wolves lunged. Razan stepped forward, moving so quickly he blurred. He lifted one hand, just one, and something in the air rippled outward. The sand beneath the wolf's paws softened instantly, collapsing into a pit. The creature yelped, skidding into the pocket of shifting grains. 2 more wolves bounded forward. Sahira felt her heartbeat climbing her throat. Razan! But he was already moving, fluid, precise, almost gentle in the way he redirected the wolves' momentum. He didn't strike them. He didn't even touch them. The sand obeyed him, rising and falling in sweeping arcs that nudged the wolves away from the caravan. It was not violence. It was choreography. And yet she could see the cost. The air around Razan shimmered more brightly. His outline flickered at the edges. His eyes, normally warm amber, glowed with the molten gold she had seen when he first emerged from the seal. When the last wolf bolted back into the dunes, Razan lowered his hand. The shimmer around him thinned. His knees buckled. Sahira was beside him instantly. Razan! He steadied himself with one hand in the sand. I am fine, he said, breath unsteady. Just too much essence at once. You said using magic wouldn't tear the desert open. It won't, he murmured, but it pulls at the tether, at me. His form flickered again. For an instant, she could see through him, straight through him, to the sand behind. Fear stabbed through her. Stop talking and sit down. That is acceptable. He attempted to sit gracefully and nearly fell sideways. Sahira caught his arm, surprised at how light he felt, as though gravity only half applied to him. Around them, the caravan buzzed with relieved voices. Some stared at Razan with awe, others with fear, but no one approached. You didn't have to protect all of them, Sahira said softly. Not at that cost. He lifted his gaze to hers, and despite the dimness of his form, his eyes were steady, warm, unwavering. That is where you are mistaken, he whispered. I did. Her throat tightened. She helped him to a patch of firmer sand and eased him down. The sun dipped below the horizon, cooling the air. Razan's skin seemed to gather the fading light, drawing it inward. I will mend, he said quietly. Essence always mends. Not if you keep giving it away, Sahira murmured. He held her gaze for a long moment, something unspoken hanging between them, something fragile and frighteningly earnest. You are angry, he said softly. Yes, she admitted, because you scared me. A faint smile touched his lips. Then I regret that. Deeply. Night settled around them. Caravan fires crackled to life. The first stars appeared, faint pinpricks of silver overhead. Razan closed his eyes, letting the desert night settle into him like a balm. Sahira stood watch beside him long after the others had drifted to sleep. She told herself she did this because he was unstable, because if he faded, everything they had worked to prevent could unfold too quickly, because the caravan was safer with someone keeping an eye on him. But as the hours stretched, she realized the truth was simpler. She didn't want him waking alone. When Razan's eyes finally opened again, long past midnight, they found her immediately, as if he had known, even in drifting consciousness, exactly where she sat. "You stayed," he murmured. She looked away, embarrassed by the sudden warmth in her cheeks. "Of course I stayed. You're my anchor," she almost said. "Partner in this journey. Burden. Or maybe something she wasn't ready to name. Responsibility," she finished weakly. Razan smiled, soft and sure. "If that is the reason you need, I will accept it." She glared at him without heat. "Go back to resting." But his smile lingered, and Sahira knew, without understanding how, that something had shifted between them. No longer scholar and anomaly, no longer djinn and accidental liberator. Something quieter, something dangerous in its gentleness. And as dawn began to rise on the second day of their journey, she felt, for the first time, that her steps toward the celestial oasis were no longer driven solely by obligation. She wanted to see where this path led. The first village appeared out of the dunes like a mirage that had decided, for once, to be kind. Mud brick walls rose low and sun-baked, ringed by sparse date palms and shallow wells that glimmered faintly in the afternoon light. Children darted along the outskirts, chasing one another with the careless energy of those who had never been far from water. The caravan's pace quickened, a ripple of relief running through the line. "Shadif," Sahira murmured, shading her eyes. "We're closer than I thought." "You've passed this way before?" Razan asked. "Once," she said, "years ago, with another excavation team. The wells here are old, fed by an underground spring that predates most of the desert's trade routes. There are records of this place going back at least 4 dynasties. 4 dynasties, Razan echoed softly. "Barely a breath. For you, maybe," she muttered. "For us, it's a pile of ancestors." He was walking easily beside her, his human-shaped form more solid than it had been the night before. Still, Sahira caught the faint blur at the edges of his silhouette whenever the sun struck him too directly. His essence hadn't fully recovered from the sandwolves. "Will the villagers be welcoming?" he asked. "If they recognize us as part of Kasira's scholarly caravan, yes," she said. "They depend on trade, and our reports to the council ensure they get supplies, repairs, protection." "And if they recognize me as something other than human?" Sahira hesitated. "Some may be afraid, some curious." She glanced at him. "Can you pretend a little more convincingly?" He adopted a thoughtful expression. "Shall I attempt clumsiness? Mortals trip, I have noticed." "Please don't," she said quickly. "You'll break your illusion if you fall through a crate." His lips curved. "Then I will endeavor to remain merely unremarkable." He tried. Sahira had to give him that. He walked at a mortal pace, occasionally allowed sand to cling to his boots, even fumbled, deliberately, with a water skin, as if unused to its knots. Still, he moved with too much unconscious grace, too much precision. People's eyes slid to him and lingered without knowing why. Ehani had once said, about certain artifacts, "Some things refuse to be background." Razan, Sahira thought, was one of those things. The caravan rolled into Shadif with the familiar clamor of arrivals, voices calling greetings, camels protesting their burdens, the sharp scent of spices carried on cooler air. An elder with a sun-lined face approached, leaning heavily on a carved wooden staff. "Archivist Badars," he said, eyeing the pennant fluttering from the caravan's lead pole. "Kasira honors us." "The honor is ours," said Galim, the caravan leader, dismounting with practiced ease. Sahira watched him exchange the ritual greetings, hands touching heart, lips, forehead in sequence. "We seek water and safe rest for a night, and bring the council's notes from last season." "You will have both?" the elder said. His gaze flicked over the group, pausing briefly on Sahira,
recognizing her from previous visits, then lingering just a heartbeat too long on Razan. Razan lowered his eyes respectfully. The elder's brows drew together, puzzled. Then he blinked and moved on, gesturing them toward the village square. For a little while there was only the bustle of arrival. Water casks were refilled. Tents were not pitched. There were guest houses for that here. But packs were sorted, animals tended. Fragrant steam rose from a communal cooking pit, where a stew of lentils and preserved lamb slowly simmered. Sahira found herself at the edge of the well, watching children drop pebbles and giggle at the splashes. Razan stood a few paces off, his gaze roaming across the village with a curious mix of familiarity and alienness. "It has grown," he said. "You've been here before?" she asked. "Long ago," he said, "when the spring first broke through the rock. There were 3 huts and a single stubborn man who swore he'd turn it into a thriving town." His mouth quirked. "I thought him overly ambitious. And now? And now I see his grandchildren's grandchildren living his dream," Razan said. "Mortals are persistent." "That's one way to put it," she said. He fell silent, watching as a little boy darted past, nearly colliding with Sahira's legs. The child hopped back, eyes wide, then grinned up at her. "Traveler," he declared, as if announcing a title. "Did you bring stories?" "Always," Sahira said. The boy's eyes slipped to Razan, then widened even further. "And you? You look like the stories." Sahira's pulse skipped. Razan smiled, gentle. "I am only a traveler," he said, "like her." "Travelers don't shine," the boy said reproachfully. Razan blinked. "Do I shine?" "Just a little," the boy said, squinting. "Like the well at night." Sahira's heart stuttered. She waited to see if Razan would be offended or frightened at being seen. Instead, his eyes softened. "Then I will try to dim," he said. "You should not stare at things that shine too much. It hurts the eyes." "I'll stare anyway," the boy announced, impressively undeterred, then tore off toward the stew pot. Sahira let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "You didn't tell him not to look at you," she said quietly. "Would you have preferred I lie?" Razan asked. "I would have preferred you be more careful," she replied. "Children talk, stories grow. The more people suspect what you are, the more danger they may be in," he finished. He nodded slowly. "You are right. I will be more careful." He actually meant it. That was the startling part. He listened to her concerns, considered them, adjusted. Sahira had met plenty of powerful, stubborn men in her life. Few had ever changed their behavior just because she pointed out a risk. She looked away, unsettled. They were given a corner of the guest house to sleep in, a long, low building where travelers unrolled mats and shared thick blankets. The scent of lentils and spices hung heavy in the air. After the meal, Galim gathered everyone to discuss the next leg of the journey. Sahira listened with half an ear, mind already moving past Shadif toward the deeper desert. "The old northern route is rumored unstable," Galim said, sifting handfuls of sand over his map. "I say we keep to the southern path."
"It's longer, but better marked." "There are older markers along the north," Sahira said automatically. "Pre-Concord stones. We might be able to." "We're not here to chase your scrolls," Ramil cut in, a little too sharply. "We're here to move people and goods, not get lost cataloging your obsessions." Sahira bristled. "Those markers predate most of our maps. If I can confirm their positions, it benefits every caravan that follows. And if you lead us into an unmarked sink dune?" "Enough," Galim said wearily. "We do not argue in front of hosts. We will decide in the morning after consulting wind signs." Ramil subsided, though not without a last irritated glance at Sahira. Razan, sitting cross-legged beside her, watched this exchange with his head propped thoughtfully on one hand. "You are patient with him," Razan observed once the meeting ended and people began to settle. "I am professional with him," Sahira said. "You wanted to throw sand in his face," Razan said serenely. She stared. "How did you—" "Your eyes narrowed," he said, "and your hand twitched toward the ground. You shouldn't watch me that closely." "How else am I to learn?" he asked. "Your expressions are very instructional." She huffed, but her lips twitched. Night deepened. One by one, lanterns were dimmed. Bodies shifted under woven blankets. Somewhere outside, a dog barked once, then settled. Sleep did not come easily for Sahira. She lay on her mat, staring up at the guest-house beams, listening to the rhythmic breathing of the others. Razan lay, a term she used loosely, near the far wall, eyes closed, body still. He had assured her he could rest in any position humans found comforting, but there was a strange stillness to him, an absence of the tiny adjustments people made while asleep. She rolled onto her side, facing away, trying not to think about him, or prophecies, or the way the air had felt when he bent the sand like water. Somewhere between wakefulness and drifting, she realized the silence had changed. The desert at night was never truly silent. There was always something, a shift of sand, a distant call, the brush of wind. Now, though, the air felt suspended, as if the world had inhaled and forgotten how to exhale. Sahira's eyes snapped open. She pushed herself up on her elbows. Razan was already standing. He moved without sound, a shadow against the faint glow of banked lanterns. His gaze was fixed on the doorway, where the thick curtain stirred, not with any visible breeze, but with a slow, deliberate motion. Sahira's heart thudded. She reached for her satchel on instinct, fingers closing around the worn handle. Razan raised a hand, a subtle warning to stay where she was. The curtain lifted. Something stepped through. It was tall, taller even than Razan, and unnaturally narrow, like a figure carved from a single shard of obsidian and then stretched. Its limbs were smoothly jointed, its torso marked with faint glowing lines that wove in strict geometric patterns. Its head was faceted like a gemstone, with no real face, just a series of angular planes that reflected lantern light. Where eyes might have been, two slivers of pale blue light burned. A murmur stirred among the sleeping travelers as a few woke, sensing something wrong. Sahira's breath locked in her chest. A celestial guardian. She had imagined them differently, hulking, monstrous, dripping with runes. This was worse. This was precise, purposeful, crafted. The guardian's head rotated with a soft grinding sound. It scanned the room slowly. Its gaze passed over Galim, Ehani's assistant scribes, the laborers, the children. It hesitated only when it came to Razan. And then it fixed on Sahira. She felt the attention like a physical weight pressing down the length of her spine. The runes on the guardian's body flared brighter. Naru Sa. The voice wasn't a sound. It was a statement inside her skull, cold and absolute. Sahira's stomach clenched. She opened her mouth and discovered that words had abandoned her. Razan stepped between her and the guardian. "You are far from your appointed boundary," he said, voice low and steady. "Why?" "It is time," the guardian said, the alien syllables somehow fitting into her mind like a key in a lock. "The seal has broken. The foretold has woken you. The bond must proceed." "No," Razan said. The single syllable carried more force than any shout. "The pattern requires union," the guardian said. It didn't move, yet somehow its presence loomed larger. "The starlight aligns. The circle closes." "Starlight bends," Razan said. "We have discussed this." "You are drifting, essence unstable. The desert trembles." "Then I will mend at the oasis," Razan said, "without forcing any bond."
"The oasis lies at the end of the path," the guardian replied. "The path winds through union. The Narusa must accept. The Djinn must bind. Balance must be restored." It stepped forward. Razan's form flickered. His hand lifted, fingers splaying, drawing on the sand beneath the guest house. The ground trembled faintly. A small, controlled tremor, enough to throw the guardian off balance, not enough to collapse the building. "Stop," Razan said quietly. "You will not touch her." Sahira swallowed hard, forcing her voice to work. "This village has nothing to do with your prophecy," she said. "Leave them out of it." The guardian's head rotated, faceted surfaces catching what little light there was.
All things are within the pattern when the pattern is stressed. That is a terribly convenient way to justify harm, Sahira said, anger pushing past fear. Who wrote your orders? Did they carve in a clause that let you ignore free will? Free will is a variable within acceptable limits, the guardian said. That's not an answer. It is the only answer required. The guardian stepped forward again. Sahira felt the tether between herself and Razan tighten like a thread pulled taut. Wordless pressure built in the air. Razan's outline brightened, his human facade slipping at the edges to reveal the luminous essence beneath. "Razan," she whispered, "don't." "I will not let them cage you," he said, without looking back. "Not now, not ever." His hand slammed down. The sand beneath the guest house surged upward, not in a violent shock, but in a sudden, silencing rise that lifted the entire floor by a handspan. Mats slid. People yelped, fully waking now, scrambling to their feet. The guardian's legs sank a few finger-widths into the shifting grains, its stance thrown off. Razan turned his hand, and the sand flowed like water, wrapping around the guardian's ankles. Not a trap, not a burial, just enough resistance to halt its advance. "Go," Razan told Sahira, voice tight. "Outside, there will be more room to direct the flow." She stared. "You want to take this outside?" "I prefer destruction where it is less likely to crush sleeping children," he said. "Please." The please cut through her paralysis more sharply than any command. She grabbed her satchel and bolted for the doorway, heart pounding. Behind her, shouts rose as others scrambled to follow, some grabbing sticks or tools, others clutching each other. The night outside was unnaturally still. Stars glittered in a sharp, cloudless sky. The air tasted metallic, like the moment before lightning struck. Sahira stumbled into the village square, breathing hard. The well's water reflected the sky like a black mirror. Shadows loomed long and strange. Razan stepped out behind her, the guardian striding through the doorway a heartbeat later. It shook off the sand that still clung to its legs with ominous ease. "Interference," it intoned. "Unacceptable. Adjustment required." "Adjustment, this," muttered one of the laborers, hurling a rock. The stone hit the guardian's chest and bounced off without leaving so much as a scratch. "Their efforts are appreciated," Razan said dryly, "if entirely ineffective." Sahira's mind raced. Guardians were constructs of stone and old law, bound to protect prophecies, yes, but the runes on their bodies had to be their anchor, their command phrases. "Can you break its binding?" she asked Razan quickly, "like you did with the sand wolves?" "Wolves are creatures of this realm," he said. "They obey natural fears. This is carved will. I can push it, slow it, not unmake it, not yet." The guardian raised one arm. Light lanced toward them, a thin, perfectly straight beam of cold blue that sizzled through the air. Razan moved faster than Sahira's eyes could track. One moment, she saw the light about to pierce the space where she stood. The next, she was pressed to the ground, Razan's body above hers, the beam searing over his shoulder. It hit the low wall encircling the well.
Stone exploded in a spray of shards. Sahira flinched as pebbles pelted her arms. Razan's shoulders tensed, his weight braced carefully so he didn't crush her. That, he said through gritted teeth, was unpleasant. "Razan," she gasped, "you're—" He pushed himself up and rolled off her, one hand pressing to his side. Beneath his fingers, his robe flickered, revealing a brief glimpse of luminous essence that quivered where the beam had grazed him. Comparable, she thought wildly, to a deep cut. "What does it want?" someone shouted. "Why is it here?" "The prophecy," Sahira said hoarsely, scrambling to her feet. "It wants to force a bond. It's here for me." Heads turned, eyes widened, fear rolled through the gathered villagers. "The Narusa must accept," the guardian said, stepping closer. "The Djinn must bind. The balance must be restored. Resistance is destabilizing." "Your face is destabilizing," Sahira muttered under her breath, because sometimes petty defiance was all that kept her from crumbling. Her mind raced. If she could get close enough to see the runes on its chest clearly. "Sahira," Razan said sharply, sensing her thoughts. "I'm not going to let it decide my life for me," she snapped. "If it wants me, it can answer questions first." "You argue with everything," he said. Something like admiration and despair mingled in his tone. "You said you liked that about me." "I said it was consistent." The guardian raised its arm again. "Enough," Razan said. He lifted both hands, fingers spread wide. The entire square shifted. Sand surged upward in a controlled wave, rising from between bricks, from gaps under walls, from the streets leading into the square. It whirled into a towering arc that curved around the guardian like a cresting wave about to crash. The construct froze, recalculating. "This village is under my protection," Razan said. His eyes blazed gold, his human form flickering. Light spilled from the edges of his silhouette. His voice deepened, layered with something older, wilder. "You will not use them as collateral for your equations. Djinn essence unstable, containment necessary." It thrust its hands outward. Blue light flared along the runes on its arms, racing into the sand wave Razan had raised. The sand solidified instantly, locking into place as if frozen. Small particles fused into glassy shards. The wave halted, mid-crash, a jagged sculpture hanging in the air. Razan's jaw clenched. Stubborn thing. Sahira's eyes flicked over the guardian's body, over the runes etched into its obsidian skin. There was a pattern there, woven through its chest, arms, legs. Most of the marks were standard binding phrases, ones she'd seen variations of in ancient tomb wards. But there, directly over what would be its sternum, was a cluster of symbols she did not recognize. They pulsed faintly, out of rhythm with the rest. "Razan," she said quickly, "that cluster on its chest, can you feel it?" He squinted. "Yes, it hums." "I think it's the command knot," she said, "the part that tells it to prioritize the prophecy over everything else. If we disrupt that, we loosen its grip on its orders," he finished. "Can you hit it?" "If I had not already spent too much essence today," he said. "Perhaps." The guardian lunged forward. "Then I'll get you closer," Sahira said. It took Razan a fraction of a second too long to realize what she meant. "Sahira!" She was already moving. She darted to the side, circling the guardian's blind spot. It tracked her for a moment, then refocused on Razan, calculating which target mattered more to the balance. "Your ability to irritate constructs is impressive," Razan called after her. "Comes from academic conferences," she shot back. She reached the guardian's flank and skidded to a halt, breath burning in her lungs. Up close, its presence was overwhelming, a cold, precise pressure that had nothing of life in it. The runes on its body glowed brighter. She fumbled in her satchel with one hand and pulled out the stick of chalk she used to mark excavation grids.
It was not a weapon, it was barely even properly magical, but it could trace. "Do you have a plan?" someone shouted from the square's edge. "Yes," she lied. "Sort of." She raised the chalk and, heart-pounding, reached toward the Guardian's chest. Her hand hit an invisible barrier. Energy repulsed her, a sharp electric shock that sent her stumbling back. The chalk snapped in two, pieces falling to the ground. The Guardian's head turned toward her. "Narusa," it said. "Contact with Command Weave is forbidden." "Oh, now you care about consent," she muttered. It raised an arm. Razan appeared between them again, faster than thought. He grasped the outstretched limb with both hands, fingers sinking into the stone as if it were wet clay. Light flared, not from the Guardian this time, but from Razan. Gold surged through his hands, racing along the Guardian's arm runes, tangling with blue. Two systems collided. The Guardian jerked, movements glitching. Its free arm spasmed, blue light sputtering. The runes on its chest flickered erratically.
"Your current directive," Razan said through gritted teeth, "is harming the balance more than protecting it. Your pattern is corrupt. Release." "Cannot release," the Guardian said. "Corruption within variables must correct." "Then let me correct you," Razan growled. He poured more essence into the contact. Sahira could see what it cost him. His human facade peeled away in layers. Sand poured from his sleeves and collar, swirling around his arms. His hair whipped in a non-existent wind. His eyes were no longer amber, but pure gold, bright enough to leave after-images. The Guardian's chest runes pulsed wildly. Cracks began to spiderweb across its surface. And then the sky changed. At first, Sahira thought it was her vision swimming. The stars overhead blurred, smearing into streaks of light. Then clouds, dark, thick, unnatural, boiled into existence across the vault of the sky, devouring starlight. Wind slammed into the square. Not a normal gust. This was a wall, an invisible force that flattened clothing, sent loose objects tumbling, tore lanterns from hooks. The half-glass sand wave Razan had raised earlier shattered with a sound like 1,000 bells breaking. "Storm!" someone screamed. "A storm!" This was no ordinary sandstorm. Sahira had weathered her share of those. Angry, loud, yes, but predictable. This was different. The air itself felt bent, twisted around a center that was not where it was supposed to be. "The Guardians called reinforcement," Razan shouted over the rising howl. "The balance is reacting. We have very little time." "To do what?" Sahira cried, shielding her face as sand stung her skin. "Disable it? Flee? Decide my entire future?" "Yes," he said simply. She stared. Even now he could be ridiculous. The Guardian jerked again, cracks deepening. Its chest runes flared blindingly bright. For a moment, its arm tore free of Razan's grip, swinging in a wide arc that slammed into his side. Razan flew. He hit the ground hard, skidding across sand and stone, leaving a faint trail of golden motes where his body dragged. "Razan!" Sahira screamed. He lay still for a heartbeat too long. Then he pushed himself up onto one elbow, teeth bared. His outline flickered so wildly she could see the square through his shoulder. "That was inelegant," he managed. The storm howled louder. Sand rose in towering columns around the village, forming spiraling walls that closed in like the ribs of some enormous beast. The well water leaped, pulled upward in a twisting thread that braided with the sand. The air crackled with energy, Djinn essence, guardian law, and the wild, uncontrolled reaction of the celestial wells to a pattern being rewritten against their design. People huddled together, shielding their faces. Children cried. Ghalim shouted orders that were torn away by the wind.
Sahira's mind raced, trying to see the pattern beneath the chaos. The guardian held itself rigid in the center of the square, light spilling from its cracks. Its focus had fragmented, half on Razan, half on her, half on the storm. Its chest runes pulsed in a frantic rhythm. This, she realized suddenly, was an opportunity. "Razan!" she yelled, forcing her way through the sand-laden wind toward him. "Listen to me!" He squinted at her, hair whipping wildly. "You choose interesting moments." "You said the prophecy was meant to maintain balance," she shouted, "not dictate love. If the balance is reacting this violently, then the system itself is recognizing something's wrong." "Accurate," he ground out, "and horrifying." "Then don't just fight the guardian," she said. "Appeal to the system." "To the wells?" "To the principles that underlie the prophecy," she said, heart pounding. "All we've been told is that the Naru-Sa must bind with the Djinn, that there must be union." She jabbed a finger toward the storm. "But nowhere does it say that union must happen without consent. The law is incomplete. The balance is overcorrecting for a flaw." He stared at her. "Sahira," he said slowly, "are you suggesting we argue with the desert itself?" "Yes," she said. "You said starlight bends. Show it how." A laugh burst out of him, wild and strained. "I knew I liked your mind for a reason." The storm intensified, as if offended. Sand spiraled higher. Lightning, thin, blue-white lines, flickered within the clouds, but never struck the ground. Razan pushed himself to his feet. He stood in the center of the square, shoulders squared, form flickering like a candle in a gale. The guardian turned toward him, stumbling slightly, as its cracked legs struggled to balance. "Essence unstable," it repeated, voice glitching. "Pattern fracturing. Corrective measure, enforce union. Bind Naru-Sa. Bind Djinn. Restore stability." "No," Razan said. "Corrective measure, redefine union." Light flared along his arms as he lifted them toward the sky. The storm's roar dimmed, not because it lessened, but because his voice cut through it. "Celestial wells," he called. "Sands between. Old law and older starlight. Hear me." Sahira had read incantations in dusty tomes, written in careful, cramped script. None of them had ever sounded like this. There was only a being of sand and star calling out to the fabric of his world with everything he had left. "You were never meant to be cages," Razan said. "You were meant to hold things together, to give structure, not to calcify choice. You bound me once to prevent harm. I accept that you acted out of fear. But this," he gestured toward the guardian, toward the storm, "this is harm." Blue lightning crackled overhead. The storm shrieked, a wordless howl of tension and resistance. "The prophecy says a Djinn and a mortal must bind to restore balance," Razan shouted. "It does not say they must be forced. It does not say the mortal's will is irrelevant. It does not say love must be sacrificed for order." His gaze flicked toward Sahira. She stood rooted, hair whipping around her face, eyes wide. Their gazes locked, and something in her chest shook loose. "I refuse," Razan said, turning his face back to the storm. "I refuse a bond without her choosing it freely. Rewrite me, unmake me, cast me back into the sands between if you must, but I will not be the instrument of a flawed design. The Naru-Sa is not a variable, she is a person." The last word rang like a struck bell. For a moment, everything stopped. The wind froze mid-gust. Sand hung in the air, suspended. The guardian's eyes flickered.
Then the storm answered. It did not speak, it did not form words, but the pressure in the square shifted, less like a hand pressing down on them, more like a massive, unseen attention turning. Sahira felt it, felt the world focus, as if the celestial wells themselves had directed their awareness here. The tether between her and Razan thrummed like a plucked string. The Guardian's chest runes flared blinding white-blue. "Proposal accepted," it said. Sahira sucked in a breath. Razan's shoulders sagged in relief. Then the world snapped. Light exploded from the Guardian's chest, blasting outward in a circular wave. Razan threw his arms up, sand rushing to form a partial shield, but the force was too great. It slammed into him, into Sahira, into everyone in the square. Sahira felt herself lifted off her feet, flung backward. She hit the ground hard, air punched from her lungs. The sky spun. Sound blurred into a high, ringing whine. When her vision cleared, the storm was gone. The sky was clear again, too clear. Stars glittered innocently overhead. The sand had settled into strangely smooth ripples, as if a giant hand had smoothed it. The Guardian lay in the center of the square, shattered. Its faceted head lay a few paces from its torso. Its limbs were cracked into segments. The runes on its body were dark. Sahira pushed herself up, every bone protesting. Razan? No answer. Her stomach dropped. Panic clawed at her throat. "Razan," she called again, louder. A faint groan answered from near the broken well wall. She stumbled toward the sound, heart hammering. Razan lay on his side, one arm stretched out as if he tried to reach for something even as he fell. His human facade had peeled back almost entirely. His body was made of light and sand braided together, flickering, unstable. He was less, as if someone had taken the full shape of him and hollowed it out. "Razan," she whispered, dropping to her knees beside him. His eyes opened slowly. They were dimmer, the gold dulled but focused. When he saw her, he smiled faintly. "You are intact," he murmured. "You're not," she said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "You look like a half-finished sketch." "I feel like one," he admitted. "The Wells accepted the revision, but it cost more essence than I anticipated." She swallowed hard. "How much more?" His gaze slid past her to the shattered Guardian. "Enough that if I were not anchored, I would already be gone." Her throat tightened. "Don't joke about that." "I was not joking." Tears burned behind her eyes, hot and unwelcome. She blinked hard, furious with herself. "You absolute, reckless, desert-stubborn!" She broke off, fingers curling into fists. "You were supposed to stabilize at the oasis, not argue with the entire balance of the world in a village square." "It seemed the right moment," he said. "You terrify me," she whispered. His expression softened. "I am sorry, truly." "You keep saying that," she snapped, "and then you keep leaping in front of beams and storms and guardians. You can't keep spending yourself like this." He considered that. "I will try to be more conservative with my heroics." "This isn't a ballad," she said. "I don't need you to be a hero. I need you to be alive." Silence stretched between them, filled only by the soft sounds of people checking on one another, murmuring about the storm. "Sahira," he said quietly. "Look." He nodded toward the Guardian's broken form. She followed his gaze. The runes on its chest, once harsh, immutable lines, now looked different. The central cluster, the command knot, had split. Some of the symbols had shifted, their strokes softened, curved. Where once she'd seen rigid phrases like "must bind," she now saw something else layered in. If chosen, with consent, equal. Her breath caught. "You did it," she whispered. "You actually changed the terms." "We did," he corrected gently. "You saw the flaw. I merely shouted at the sky." She laughed, the sound shaky and wet. "You shouted very loudly." "I had a good reason," he said. His gaze went back to her, warm even through the exhaustion. She looked away, suddenly unable to bear the intensity of his eyes. Her heart pounded too fast, for reasons that had very little to do with storms and prophecies. Ghalim approached, dusting sand from his beard. His face was pale beneath the grit. "Is it over?" he asked hoarsely. "For now," Sahira said. "The Guardian's directive has been altered. It won't try to force anything again." "And the storm?" "An aftershock," Razan murmured. "The wells adjusting. They won't take that path again. It was too costly." Ghalim's gaze dropped to Razan. His breath hitched. "You look terrible," Razan suggested.
"Faded," Ghalim said bluntly. "Is there anything we can do?" "Yes," Sahira said. "We need to keep moving toward the oasis. He can't repair fully anywhere else. And along the way," Razan added, "we must watch for others like this guardian. There will be more. But they will not be able to wield the prophecy in the same way. We have narrowed their options." "You say that like you're adjusting a trade contract," Ghalim muttered. "It is all negotiation," Razan said. "Some tables are just larger." The elder of Shadif hobbled forward, leaning heavily on his staff. His eyes were wide, his hand shaking slightly. "You brought this upon us," he said to Sahira and Razan. There was no anger in his voice, only awe and a bone-deep weariness. "Storms that don't behave like storms. Stone men from the sky. Words that shake the air." Sahira bowed her head. "I'm sorry, we didn't intend for the Guardians to find us here." "Intentions matter," the elder said, "but so do outcomes." He looked around at the square, at the intact homes, the unburied wells. "We have seen storms strip a place to its foundations. Tonight, we still have roofs." His gaze sharpened. "You protected us." "This village sits on an old spring," Razan said. "The wells favor it. I could not stand by and watch it be used as leverage." The elder peered at him, squinting. "You are not just a traveler." Razan inclined his head. "Not entirely, no." The elder's lips moved soundlessly for a moment, perhaps running through half-remembered childhood prayers, before he straightened as much as his spine allowed. "Then may whatever you are continue to walk in our shade," he said. "If the sky listens when you shout, shout well." Razan smiled faintly. "I will do my best." The elder nodded once and shuffled away to tend to his people. Sahira exhaled slowly. Her limbs felt heavy, as if the storm had left sand in her bones. "Ramel," she asked suddenly, realization striking. "Where is Ramel?" Ghalim's face tightened. "When the storm hit, I lost track of him." They found him near the edge of the square, half buried in sand, coughing and swearing as he dug himself out. His hair was wild, his robes coated in dust. But his hands... His hands clutched something dark and jagged. Sahira's gaze sharpened. "What is that?" she demanded. Ramel jerked, hiding the object behind his back. "Nothing." "Ramel," Ghalim said warningly. "It's just..." He hesitated, then grudgingly brought his hand forward. In his palm lay a shard of obsidian. Not natural obsidian. This was too smooth, too sharply cut. Tiny runes crawled across its surface, faintly glowing blue-white. Sahira recognized the script. "A fragment of the Guardian," she whispered, "from its chest." "Fell near me during the blast," Ramel said quickly. "I thought, well, someone needed to preserve it for study. We can't let something like this crumble into sand." Sahira's stomach clenched. "Ramil, That shard still holds some of its power, its directives. It could be dangerous. Knowledge is worth danger, he said, fingers tightening around the shard. Think of what we could learn about prophecy enforcement, about binding constructs, about how to misuse them, Sahira cut in sharply. This isn't a curiosity. It's a loaded bow with a frayed string. Ramil's eyes flashed. You can't keep all discoveries to yourself, Sahira. Just because you have a djinn willing to recite ancient law for you doesn't mean the rest of us can't claim something valuable. Razan stepped forward quietly. The fragment is not stable, he said. The runes are misaligned from the break. If you keep it near your heart too long, it will treat your choices as anomalies. You enjoy your ambition. Imagine it telling you which paths are acceptable. Ramil paled slightly. You're lying. Would you like to test that theory? Razan asked, voice mild. Ramil wavered. Sahira saw the war in his eyes, between fear and the hunger for recognition that had driven him for years. She'd seen that look before, in scholars who took shortcuts, who tampered with relics without proper precautions. Ramil, she said quietly, please, we have already torn one hole in the world tonight. Don't widen it. He looked at her, jaw tight. Fine, he snapped at last, and flung the shard onto the ground. It landed near the shattered guardian's torso. Razan flicked his fingers. Sand flowed over the fragment, burying it in an instant, smoothing the surface. Better, Razan said softly. Sand is kinder than scholars, sometimes. Ramil's shoulders hunched. He stalked away without another word. Sahira watched him go, unease gnawing at her. He'd given up the shard, for now, but his expression had not been that of someone convinced, only someone temporarily thwarted. We'll need to keep an eye on him, she muttered. Yes, Razan agreed quietly. Ambition redirected is more dangerous than ambition denied. The rest of the night passed in a blur of repairs, reassurances, and exhausted gratitude. Villagers and caravanners worked side by side, clearing debris, checking wells, soothing frightened children. Sahira bandaged minor cuts, passed out what herbs she had, answered questions with as much steadiness as she could muster. Somewhere in the midst of that, she realized Razan had vanished. Panic flared. She found him at last on the edge of the village, where packed earth gave way to open dunes. He stood alone, his silhouette faint against the starlit sand. The wind was gentle now, barely more than a caress. You should be resting, she said, approaching quietly. I am, he replied.
In my way.
You look half transparent, she said. If you get any more rested, you'll be invisible.
Would that upset you? He asked.
She hesitated. Yes. He turned to face her fully. His eyes, though dim, were still warm. Good, he said. Then I will endeavor to remain at least 60% visible. You're impossible, she said, but a smile tugged at her mouth anyway. They stood in silence for a moment, side by side, looking out over the dark, rippling sea of sand. Thank you, she said finally. The words felt too small, but they were all she had. For what you did, for what you risked, for refusing. He was quiet for a long time. I did not do it only for you, he said at last. I did it for myself as well. For all djinns bound to prophecies they did not choose. For the idea that power can be used to protect choice instead of override it. And yet, she said softly, you could have argued all of that without anchoring the entire revision to me. His lips twitched. You are a very compelling central variable. That is not how you compliment someone, she said. Then allow me to try again. He turned, studying her face. Sahira Namir, you are the first mortal I have met who looked at a celestial guardian and thought, I can probably debate it into better ethics. She huffed. That's not, well, maybe a little.
And when I shouted at the sky," he continued, "you did not stand there hoping I knew what I was doing. You gave me the argument. You gave me the wedge to pry open old law. Without you, I would have simply been loud." "You're giving me too much credit," she murmured. "I am giving you precisely as much as you deserve, and perhaps a little more, because I am biased." Her heartbeat stuttered. "Biased? In your favor," he said simply. Silence stretched. The wind lifted a strand of her hair, brushed it against her cheek. She tucked it behind her ear with fingers that trembled slightly. "Razan," she said slowly, "you know that changing the prophecy doesn't settle anything between us. Not yet." "I know," he said. "The old pattern assumed inevitability. The new one requires choice. That is more frightening." "For you?" she asked, surprised. "For both of us," he said. "If you are bound by prophecy, then if you turn away, it is a rebellion against the stars. But if you are truly free, then if you turn away, it is only against me." Her breath caught. "You're afraid I'll reject you?" "Of course," he said, as if it were obvious. "You are sharp and stubborn and see through my more theatrical flourishes. You could do better. Better than an immortal being tied to the wells who can argue law with the sky?" she said skeptically. "That's a very short list." His mouth curved.
"You admit there is a list, then?" "I admit nothing," she said quickly. He chuckled, then winced, the sound turning into a small, pained breath. Immediately, Sahira's concerns surged back to the forefront. "You need to stop talking and actually rest," she said. "We still have to reach the oasis. And now that the system has accepted the idea of consent, we have to make sure it doesn't change its mind halfway there." "It cannot," he said. "Once law is rewritten, it spreads. Slowly, but inexorably. The other guardians will feel this shift. Some may resist, others may adapt, but none can ignore it." "That's not where my faith has issues," she said. "I trust the law more than I trust the people who will try to use it." "You speak as if you are not one of those people," he said. She shot him a look. "I'm going to sleep before I start debating you about jurisprudence." "As you wish," he said. She took a step back, then hesitated. "Razan," she said. He tilted his head. "I'm glad," she said quietly, forcing the words out past the tightness in her throat, "that you refused the earlier version, even if I hadn't been the one involved. No one deserves to have their future written in stone without a say." He was very still for a heartbeat. "That," he said, voice soft, "is the kindest thing anyone has ever said to me." "That can't be true," she said automatically. "The bar was low," he said. "I spent a lot of time with people who thought binding me was the kindest thing they could do for themselves." Her heart ached. "Then we'll raise the bar," she said, slowly, argument by argument. His smile was small and luminous. "I look forward to it." She turned before she could say anything foolish, heading back toward the guest house. The square was quieter now, the villagers exhausted, fear dulled by sheer fatigue. As she walked, Sahira pressed a hand lightly to her chest. The tether between her and Razan hummed faintly, not heavy, not constricting, but present. It no longer felt like something dragging at her, pulling her toward a predetermined outcome. It felt like a question, hanging in the air between them. Not, will you obey, but what will you choose? The knowledge was terrifying. It was also unexpectedly exhilarating. Act by act, step by step, the path to the celestial oasis had changed. It was no longer a march toward unavoidable binding. It was a journey toward a choice she had not yet decided how to make, with a djinn who had chosen, in front of the entire sky, to risk himself on her freedom. Somewhere deep beneath the desert, the celestial wells shifted, their currents altered by that decision. The balance would not forget it. Neither, Sahira thought, as she lay back down on her mat, hands folded over the steady thrum in her chest, would she. The desert changed as they left Shadif behind. The dunes grew higher, their ridges sharper, the shadows between them deeper and more secretive. The familiar threads of caravan routes thinned, until the markers Sahira knew so well were replaced by older signs. Half-buried stone columns, weathered stacks of cairns, the occasional carved spiral on a lonely rock face. Razan walked more quietly now. He kept his human-shaped form, but there was a translucence to him that worried Sahira. In bright sunlight, she could almost see the pale gleam of sand through his hands when he reached for a waterskin to pass it to someone. His steps barely disturbed the ground. "You're fading," she said quietly on the 4th day after Shadif, as they crested a particularly steep dune. "I am conserving," he replied. "There is a difference." "Is there?" "Yes. Conserving means I still have something to spend." She didn't laugh. They paused at the top of the dune, the caravan stretching behind them like a crawling, multicolored line. Ahead, the desert dropped into a wide, shallow basin ringed by jagged rock outcroppings. In the far distance, something darker broke the expanse of gold, a faint band of stone rising out of the sand like the spine of a buried beast. "There," Razan said, lifting his chin toward it, "the first ridge of the oasis's outer ring." Sahira narrowed her eyes. "That's still at least 3 days away." "Less, if we cut across the basin," he said. "But the winds there are unpredictable." "That seems like the sort of thing you might want to avoid, given your current state." He smiled faintly. "I thought you liked arguing with the weather." "I like arguing with guardians," she corrected. "Storms are less receptive." "Even storms can listen," he said. "Sometimes." They descended into the basin. The air was different here. It carried a faint coolness, a subtle dampness, as if somewhere deep beneath their feet water was moving. Sahira felt it in the way her skin prickled, in the quiet hum that seemed to follow each step. "You feel it?" Razan asked softly, walking close enough that their shoulders nearly brushed. "Something," she admitted, "like when I stand near certain ruins, as if the world is thick." "The wells are closer," he said. "The sands between are thin here. Be careful what you think about too loudly." She raised a brow. "The wells can read thoughts now?" "Not read, echo." He tapped his temple lightly. "Intense emotions ripple. Sometimes the desert answers in kind." "Is that why you're so composed all the time?" she asked. "So you don't accidentally cause an emotional sandstorm?" He looked almost offended. "I am composed because I am dignified." "That's one word for it." They walked on. The caravan adjusted its formation, tightening ranks as the landscape grew stranger. The dunes were interrupted by patches of cracked earth, circles of stone half swallowed by sand. Once they passed a ring of standing stones carved with symbols so worn that even Sahira couldn't decipher them. Razan touched one lightly in passing, his expression unreadable. "Old?" she asked. "Very," he said. "From before my binding, before many things." "Do you remember all of it?" she asked. "Everything you've seen?" "Not as a scroll remembers ink," he replied. "It is layered. Some memories are sharp, others are impressions, smells, the feel of a particular wind, the taste of a certain starlight." "You talk about starlight like people talk about bread," she said. "It sustains in its way," he replied. As the sun began its descent, Galeem called for them to make camp in the shelter of a low rock ridge. There were no trees here, no village walls, just the endless roll of sand and stone. The sky stretched wide and pale above them. Sahira helped secure ropes and stakes, then retreated to the edge of the camp with her wax tablet to record the day's route. Her fingers moved automatically, tracing the curves of the old symbols she'd seen on the standing stones, adding notes about the basin's shape, the faint coolness in the air. "You are cataloging the path to the oasis," Razan said, approaching, "even now." "Someone should," she replied. If we make it there and back, it will be the first verified record in centuries. And if we do not? Then someone will find my notes, she said, and hopefully be smarter about their route choices. He sat beside her, moving carefully, as if he had to think about each motion. Up close, she could see the way the thin skin of his human form flickered. A breeze moved through the air. It seemed to move through him as much as around him. "You're worse today," she said, unable to keep the worry from her voice. "The wells are pulling," he said, "like a tide. My essence is fraying at the edges. It will stabilize once we reach the oasis, or unravel entirely. That is not remotely comforting." "I am not trying to comfort you," he said. "I am trying to be honest." She stared at him. "You could lie, just a little. Say something like, 'I'll be fine, Sahira, stop worrying.'" "I will not insult you with a lie that transparent," he said. "You would hear the false note. Besides," his gaze softened, "if you worry, it means you care." Heat rose to her cheeks. She looked away, focusing very intently on her notes. "I care because if you unravel, the desert unravels with you." "Of course," he said, "purely practical concerns. That's not what I—" He was smiling, faint but unmistakable. She huffed, torn between exasperation and something warmer.
Silence settled between them, comfortable this time. "Sahira," Razan said quietly after a while, "may I ask you something personal?" She tensed. "That depends on the question." "Before all this," he said, gesture taking in the basin, the faint hum of the wells, "what did you think your life would look like 10 years from now?" She blinked. "That's your personal question?" "Yes," he said seriously. "I am attempting to understand what future I have intruded upon." She looked down at her hands, at the ink stains on her fingers, the faint calluses left by styluses and brushes. "I thought I'd be in Sahira," she said slowly, "head of one of the archives perhaps, teaching younger scholars how to dust things without sneezing on them, arguing about interpretations of old texts, maybe going on the occasional dig to make sure people didn't do anything foolish." "Would you have been happy?" he asked. She hesitated. "I think I would have been content." "And now?" he asked. "Now my definition of content feels small," she admitted. "Not wrong, just incomplete." He was quiet for a long time. "I did not mean to steal your future," he said softly. "You didn't," she said. "You disrupted it. There's a difference." She glanced at him. "Besides, I walked into that disruption with my eyes open. I chose to come." "You chose to prevent storms," he said, "to protect people." "And to see if prophecies can be argued with," she added. "Don't pretend my motives were purely noble." "I would never accuse you of being purely anything," he said. She rolled her eyes, but her lips curved. Later, when the camp had quieted and the stars brightened overhead, Sahira lay awake listening to the desert. There was a sound, just beneath hearing, a low, steady thrum. Not threatening, not comforting, present, a pulse. She turned onto her side. Razan lay a short distance away, his form faintly luminous. His eyes were closed, but she doubted he was fully asleep in the human sense. "Razan," she whispered, "are you drifting?" "Yes," he murmured, without opening his eyes, "and also listening to you not sleep." "I am sleeping," she said. "You are not," he replied. "Your breathing pattern is different when you sleep." "You've been studying my breathing?" "I study everything about you," he said simply. "It is how I learn." Her heartbeat stuttered. "That's not unnerving at all." "You can study me as well," he offered, for balance. "Maybe," she muttered. "Right now I'm busy not sleeping." "Why?" he asked. "Is it fear, anticipation, both?" "Both," she admitted. "We're almost there. To the oasis. To whatever happens next. To the place where the tether can be reworked, he said, or cut. She swallowed. Cut? Yes, he said quietly. If the wells accept the revision fully, there may be a way to sever the bond, to free you entirely. No tether, no pull, nothing tying you to me. The words hit her like a blow. That's good, she said after a moment. Isn't it? That was the goal. Was it? He asked softly. Truly? Yes, she said too quickly. Of course. That's why we've been doing all of this, so I can choose my life. So no prophecy can force me into anything. And if your choice, he said, eyes opening to fix on her with dim, steady warmth, is to walk away from me at the end of it, she felt suddenly, acutely, how thin the air was. I don't know, she whispered. I keep telling myself that's what I should do, that any rational person would. You're complicated, dangerous even if you don't mean to be. I had a perfectly manageable life before you. Manageable, he repeated. Yes. He was quiet for a heartbeat. Then, very gently, he asked, Did you love it? Her throat tightened. Love is a strong word. So is fear, he said. You use it freely. I don't want to hurt you, she blurted. He blinked. That is sudden. If we sever the tether, she said, words spilling out now, if I walk away, will it hurt you? He took a breath, and she saw the way it made his form flicker. Yes, he said, it will. How much? Less than dying, he said, with a faint smile, more than a paper cut. Razan, she said, warningly. It will feel like losing a limb, a part of myself that has become used to your shape. But Djinn adapt. We were meant to shift. I would survive. And if we don't sever it, she whispered, if we leave it as it is? Then we will remain bound, he said, lightly but undeniably. Our paths will tug toward each other, no matter where we go. It would not force love, but it would prevent clean distance. Those are terrible options, she said. Yes, he agreed, they are. Can we ask the wells for a better one? She suggested weakly. We can always ask, he said. Whether they answer is another matter. She lay back, staring at the stars. Do you regret any of it? She asked quietly, shouting at the sky, challenging the law, coming with me? He considered. I regret the fear I have caused you, he said, and the danger I have dragged you into. I do not regret knowing you, or standing beside you, or choosing your freedom over my certainty. Her eyes stung. That was a very poetic answer, she said. You bring it out of me, he replied. She turned her head just enough to see his profile, faintly luminous against the dark. Sleep, he said softly, or your version of it. The oasis will not be kinder for lack of rest. She closed her eyes. Eventually, exhaustion dragged her under. They reached the ridge 2 days later. Up close, it was not a single wall of stone, but a series of rising terraces, each carved by wind and time into sweeping arcs. Narrow passes cut between them, some choked with sand, others leading deeper into shadowed gullies. It's like the ribs we saw at the ruins, Sahira murmured, only alive. Everything hums here, Razan said. He was right. As they climbed the first terrace, the hum beneath their feet grew louder, not in her ears, but in her bones. Her teeth buzzed, her fingers tingled. Everyone feels that, Galeem called, voice tight. Yes, someone answered shakily. What is it? The wells, Sahira said. The heart of the oasis is close. They made camp in a sheltered notch between 2 ridges, the air cooler than it had been in weeks. A faint mist hung low over the ground, clinging to their robes, beating on their skin. It smelled like damp stone and something else,
something metallic and sharp. Essence condensation, Razan said quietly when she commented on it. The magic here is thick enough to taste. Is that good? She asked. It is. He searched for the word. Potent. Galeem approached them as they stood at the edge of camp, surveying the twisting paths that led deeper into the ridge network. Beyond this point, Galeem said, my charts end. I can't guarantee safe routes. If we go on, we do so on your guidance. His gaze flicked to Razan. The safe path isn't the easiest, Razan said. We'll need to avoid the deeper gullies. Essence pools there. It can drown mortals. We could stay here, Galeem said. Let you go on alone. No, Sahira said immediately. Both men looked at her. The Guardians already know we're here, she said. The system knows. If we leave the caravan at the edge of this place, we paint a target on them. They have protection inside our tether's radius. We move together, we survive together. Galeem searched her face, then nodded slowly. Then we follow your lead, both of you. He walked away to relay instructions. Razan watched Sahira with a curious expression. You did not hesitate, he said. They're my responsibility, she said. We brought them into this. We don't abandon them now. You truly are the worst kind of leader, he remarked. She bristled. Excuse me. The kind who refuses to step away when it would be safer for them, he said. The kind who insists on standing in front. I'm not the leader, she said. I'm just stubborn. He smiled faintly. Those things are often related. They set out at dawn, leaving most of the caravan's bulkier supplies in a carefully marked cache. Only essential packs, water, and tools went with them as they followed Razan along narrow paths cut into the stone. The deeper they went, the stranger the landscape became. Stone archways rose overhead, carved by no hand Sahira recognized. The rock was veined with faintly glowing lines. Essence channels, Razan explained, which pulsed slowly like a heartbeat. In some places, shallow pools of liquid light had gathered. Pale, shimmering, neither water nor not. Do not touch, Razan warned sharply when a curious laborer leaned too close. It will wrap itself around your essence and forget to let go. That's horrifying, Sahira muttered. Yes, he agreed cheerfully. The wells are not user-friendly. They reached a plateau by midday, a wide, flat expanse of stone ringed by higher ridges. In the center, a shallow depression held a pool of that strange luminous liquid. It glowed with a soft, steady light, casting faint reflections on their faces. The first threshold, Razan said. Our path to the oasis proper runs along the channels around it. Sahira stepped closer, peering into the pool. She expected to see her reflection. Instead, she saw fragments. A girl in Khasira's archives, ink on her nose. A woman standing before an obsidian pillar, hand outstretched. A pair of hands holding a broken chalkstick. The images overlapped, shifted, blurred. It reflects potential, Razan murmured at her shoulder. Not what is, what might have been, what could yet be. She swallowed. I hate it. Most people do, he said. The ground trembled. It was subtle at first, a faint vibration under their feet, the ripple of liquid in the pool. Then it intensified, deepening into a low, rolling shudder that made stones jump and tools clatter. Sahira's hand flew to the strap of her satchel, steadying herself. Tell me that's normal. It is not unprecedented, Razan said warily. The pool's glow brightened. Thin tendrils of light reached up from its surface, curling into the air like searching fingers. Back, Razan ordered. Everyone, back. They stumbled away from the depression as the tendrils thickened, twisted together, and rose. The glow intensified, forcing Sahira to squint. A shape formed. Not a guardian, not exactly, but similar. This construct was made of pure light and liquid essence. Its edges soft, but its presence immense. Where the guardian had been rigid geometry and carved law, this thing was fluid structure, constantly shifting between forms. It had no face, but she could feel it looking at them. At her. At Razan. The wells, Razan whispered, a more direct expression. Is that good? Sahira hissed. It means they wish to speak, he said. It also means we cannot run. The construct's head tilted. A wordless impression pressed against Sahira's mind. Curiosity, scrutiny, something like calculation. Razan stepped forward, shoulders squared, even as his form flickered dangerously. We have already presented our argument, he said calmly. You accepted the revision. The construct's light pulsed. A cascade of impressions flooded Sahira's senses. Images of the shattered guardian, of the storm, of Razan shouting at the sky. Then more. Snapshots of countless other bindings, other Narusa figures across ages, many of them faceless, their choices obscured. Correction incomplete, the not voice pressed against her thoughts. Pattern adapts, variables unstable. Sahira forced herself to stand straighter. That's the point of variables, she said. They're not fixed. You can't demand stability from a system that includes free will. The construct's attention shifted fully to her. She felt it like a beam of pressure, not painful, but immense. Origin, it whispered in the silent space of her mind. Memories not her own flickered at the edges of her awareness. Shards of images. A woman with Sahira's eyes but different hair, standing before a similar pool. A circle of robed figures carving runes into obsidian. A djinn with Razan's silhouette bound in chains of light. Sahira staggered, clutching her head. Stop! Razan was at her side in an instant, his hand hovering just shy of her shoulder. Do not push into her mind, he warned. She is not part of your law. She is origin, the impression insisted, stronger now. Sahira gritted her teeth. What does that mean? More images, more echoes. She saw a scroll bearing her family name, Namir, not as a surname, but as a sigil. She saw a younger version of Ihani's face on a mural, labeled Archivist Lineage. She saw a woman with steady eyes and ink-stained fingers reach out to touch an obsidian seal, just as Sahira had. The tether between Sahira and Razan thrummed violently. Your bloodline, Razan said slowly, piecing it together. The first Narusa, the one who stood at the creation of the original prophecy. No, Sahira whispered. I would have known. There would be records, stories. Would there? Razan asked. If those who wrote the law wanted to protect you or control you, would they not also control what was remembered? The construct's light flared, sending another wave of impressions. Sahira saw the first Narusa, if that's what she was, standing in a circle of light, facing a being of sand and star who was not Razan, but similar. There was fear on her face, determination. The law had been woven around them as a compromise, binding djinn and mortals in enforced unions to prevent a catastrophe the wells could not otherwise contain. It was built wrong, Sahira gasped, understanding slamming into her. From the start, it was never meant to be gentle. It was a cage disguised as protection. Logical, the wells pressed. Effective, balance maintained. At what cost? Sahira snapped. How many lives twisted? How many choices stolen? The construct's light dimmed, pulsed, then steadied. Cost acceptable, it said.
Razan stepped in front of Sahira, fury bleeding through the flicker of his form. Not any more, he said. You accepted the revision once. You will accept the completion. Completion, the wells echoed. We will write a new anchor, Razan said, not bound to bloodlines or coerced unions. A law that requires truly equal consent, that prevents djinn from forcing mortals and mortals from binding djinn without their will. The construct surged taller, its light intensifying. Djinn uncontrolled, dangerous, it pressed. Mortals uncontrolled, reckless. Law required. Yes, Sahira said. Law, not chains. You've seen what Razan is like when given the choice to act. He protects, he argues, he doesn't submit blindly. He is anomaly, the wells said. So was the first Narusa, Sahira shot back. So am I. So are countless others whose names you erased into variables. Maybe that's the problem. Your law treats people as pieces instead of partners. The construct's form wavered. Patterns stable, it insisted, but there was a tremor now, a hesitation. Your patterns are decaying anyway, Razan said quietly. Guardians glitching, storms misbehaving. You feel it. The world has changed since you first wrote this law. You need a new model. He glanced back at Sahira, then returned his gaze to the construct. Let us be your pilot test. Razan, she began. He turned to her, expression gentle. You wanted a better option than the ones we discussed, he said. I think I see one, but it is dangerous. She swallowed. Of course it is. The wells need a new template for binding law, he said. One that uses consent as a core variable, not an afterthought. They are asking for origin because your lineage helped write the first model. They need you to write the second. Her heart slammed against her ribs. Razan, I'm not a law weaver. I'm a historian. I copy other people's words. I don't create binding systems. You read them, he said. You see the flaws. You understand the consequences. That makes you more qualified than those who first carved this mess. She shook her head. And what? I just tell the wells how to write a new prophecy? Not prophecy, he said. Framework. A set of rules for how any Djinn mortal bond must be structured, if it is to draw on the well's power. Mutual consent. Revocable terms. Equal ability to withdraw. No hidden clauses. No binding one without the clear, conscious, ongoing agreement of the other. That sounds ideal, she said faintly, which is exactly why it probably isn't possible. It will be costly, Razan said. To rewrite a law that deep, you'll have to... something. Her skin went cold. Something like what? He held her gaze. Your position at its center. As its first living example. Understanding hit her like a gust of icy wind. You're saying, she whispered, that in order to create a system of free, revocable bonds, I would have to form one? With me, he said, just as quietly. Fully, consciously, no back doors, no deniability. Her stomach lurched. And if I don't? Then the wells keep patching broken law with more broken law, he said. Guardian by guardian, storm by storm. And sooner or later, they will decide the cost of free will is too high and revert to what they know. Silence pressed in. The construct loomed overhead, its light pulsing. The caravan watched from the edges of the plateau, faces drawn, eyes wide. Galim's hand gripped his staff hard enough to turn his knuckles white. Ramil hovered at the back, gaze flicking between Sahira, Razan, and the wells with naked calculation. I won't let them cage you, Sahira said, voice shaking. Not like the first Narusa, not with my blood. It wouldn't be a cage, Razan said, not if you write it right. His expression softened. But it would be a commitment. To me, to the law, to this connection. You would be choosing both at once. That's too much, she whispered. Too fast. I know. Do you want it? She asked, the question ripped from her. He closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, they were steady. Yes, he said. I want you. I want a life where I stand beside you, not because some star map says so, but because you looked at who I am and chose me anyway. I want a law that protects that choice for everyone, not just us. But I will not ask you to sacrifice yourself to it. You just did, she said. No, he said. I offered you the truth. The choice is still yours. The well's construct pressed against her mind again, not with images this time, but with a question. Agreement? Refusal? Her pulse thundered. "If we do this," she said, voice barely more than breath, "and I regret it later, then we will write regret into the law. We will write a way for either of us to step back without destroying the other. That is the point. Not to pretend we will never change, but to promise that if we do, the law will not be the knife." Her throat closed. "You're asking me to trust you." "I am asking you," he said, "to trust yourself." Behind them, the plateau shuddered. Sahira felt the tether between herself and Razan vibrate at a pitch just shy of pain. The well's impatience, their strain, their ancient grinding calculations pressed at the edges of her thoughts. If she said no, they would back away, for now. But the system would keep straining at cracks. Guardians would keep glitching. Storms would keep misbehaving.
If she said yes, she would bind herself to Razan in a way no careful academic plan had ever accounted for. "You could walk away from me," Razan said quietly. "Now, before any of this is written. I would not follow if you asked me not to. You would be free." She looked at him, really looked. At the way his form flickered more violently now that they were this close to the wells. At the exhaustion in his eyes, layered with something softer, more vulnerable. At the way he stood facing both her and the construct, as if he could protect her from a force that underpinned the world. He had shouted at the sky for her freedom. He had taken cuts meant for villages and caravans. He had refused to claim her on the basis of a prophecy that would have given him everything he wanted with no more effort than a cent. He had, in every way that mattered, already chosen her. The real question was whether she could choose him, not as obligation, not as sacrifice, but as herself. Her heart was a drum in her chest. Her fear was a tight band around her lungs. Her choice was a quiet, steady thing underneath both. Sahira stepped closer to Razan until their hands were almost touching. "If we do this," she said, "it's not because the wells want a template, or because the desert needs a new law, or because my bloodline owes anyone anything. It's because I choose it." "Then do not say yes for the world," he said. "Say yes or no for you." She took a breath. "Sahira Namir," she said, voice shaking but clear, "chooses. Wait." The word cracked across the plateau, sharp as a whip. Ramil stepped forward from the caravan's edge, face pale, eyes fever-bright. His hand was hidden in his robe. "You can't do this," he said, voice trembling. "You can't just rewrite the rules of magic and power on a feeling. Do you have any idea what that will do to everything we know? To every binding contract? Every safety we've built?" "That's the point," Sahira said. "Those safeties have been cages." "For some," he snapped, "not for everyone. Some of us have built our lives on understanding the old systems, on navigating them. You're talking about tearing it all up and trusting—" His gaze flicked to Razan, full of contempt and fear. "This anomaly to hold it together." "You're afraid of losing your advantage," Razan said quietly. Ramil's jaw clenched. "I'm afraid of chaos." "You're afraid of power you can't predict," Sahira said. "Better the devil you know," Razan replied. "There are no devils here," Razan replied. "Only stubborn scholars and tired jinn." Ramil's hand came out of his robe. He was holding a shard. Not the one he'd surrendered in Shadif, that had been buried under sand, but another, smaller piece of obsidian, its runes faintly glowing blue-white. Sahira's stomach dropped. "You took more," she whispered. "Of course I did.
he said, voice shaking. "You think I'd leave something like this behind? I'm not a fool. I've studied it. I've seen how it interacts with law. This," he lifted the shard, "is a stabilizer. It enforces directives. You want to rewrite the wells?" His eyes gleamed. "Then you're going to do it with guardrails." "Ramel," Galeem barked, "put that down." "Why?" Ramel demanded, stepping backward toward the edge of the glowing pool. "So she can hand our entire magical framework over to a djinn's sentimental speech? No. No. If we do this, we do it with constraints. We make sure this new law doesn't turn djinn into unchecked forces again. We build in limits." Sahira's skin crawled. "You don't want limits. You want control." "Same thing," he said. "No," Razan said sharply. "It is not." The well's construct pulsed, attention shifting to the shard in Ramel's hand. The liquid in the pool quivered. Guardian fragment, the impression pressed into Sahira's mind. Law fragment. Incompatible with revision. "Not incompatible," Ramel said, as if he heard. "Just guiding. I can help. I understand the old runes. I can weave them into the new framework. Ensure it's not too soft." He stepped into the pool. The world lurched. The liquid light surged around his ankles, clinging, pulling him deeper. He gasped, but instead of retreating, he held the shard aloft, as if offering it. "See me," he cried, eyes wide. "See my patterns. Use my structure. I can help you stabilize. You don't need them. You need someone who understands control." "Ramel!" Sahira shouted. "Get out of there!" The well's construct shuddered. Its light flickered violently. The tether between Sahira and Razan screamed in her bones. "Anomaly," the wells pressed, now full of static. Conflicting commands. Fragment intrusion. Pattern. Fracturing. Razan swore in a language Sahira had never heard before. "Ramel," he shouted, "let go of the shard, now!" "No," Ramel gasped. The liquid was at his knees now, gripping like gelatinous glass. "You don't get to decide everything. You don't get to rewrite the world without the rest of us. I will not be sidelined, not this time." His eyes met Sahira's, wild and desperate. "If I have to anchor this law myself," he snarled, "I will." The liquid surged up to his chest. The shard flared, runes blazing bright enough to hurt. The well's construct convulsed, its form splintering into jagged beams of light. Sahira's vision doubled. For a second, she was in two places at once, standing on the plateau and drowning in a whirl of runes and equations and law, all of it wrapped around Ramel's frantic conviction that he knew better. Then Razan's hand closed around her wrist, anchoring her. "Listen to me," he said, his voice the only steady thing in the chaos. "The wells are about to adopt a new template, and Ramil is forcing his fragment into it. If they accept his pattern, everything will be worse," she said, breathless. "A new law built on old chains." "Yes," he said, "we have to stop them." "How?" she demanded. "He's already in the pool. The wells are listening to him." "They're listening to anyone who stands at the center," Razan said. "He has given them a strong signal. We have to give them a stronger one." He looked at her with a mixture of determination and something like apology. "I can anchor you to the wells," he said, "fully, for a moment, long enough for your voice to override his. But it will mean opening the tether," she finished, understanding crashing into her. "All the way." "Yes," he said. "No half measures, no illusions. You will feel what I feel. The wells will feel you. It will be intimate." Her heart pounded. "And then?" "And then you speak," he said, "not just with words, with everything you are. You show them what a law built on consent feels like." "And you?" she whispered. "What happens to you? If we do it right?" He smiled, thin and fierce. "I live. The law stabilizes. Ramil's fragment dissolves. The world is better. And if we don't, then I burn out," he said simply, "and you will hurt. And the law will be written by whoever is left standing in the center." He didn't say Ramil's name. He didn't have to. The well's construct flickered, half its form bending toward Ramil, half toward her and Razan. The pool glowed brighter, its light climbing Ramil's neck now. His face contorted, half in ecstasy, half in terror. Sahira's choice loomed, larger than any she'd made yet. "Do it," she said, before she could talk herself out of it. "Anchor me." Razan searched her face, jaw tight. "Sahira." "Do it," she repeated. "You said you wouldn't force me. I'm asking you. Now." He inhaled once, sharply. "Forgive me." "For what?" "For this." He took her hand. The tether between them, which had always felt like a faint hum, a steady gravity, exploded into sensation. The world vanished. For a heartbeat, 2, 10, 100, Sahira was not on the plateau. She was in the wells. There was no up or down here, no air, no water. There was only light and sand and starlight and law, all braided into intricate patterns that stretched beyond her comprehension. She felt Razan not beside her, but around her, through her, a current of warm, golden essence that wrapped around her own fragile thread of life. He did not overwhelm. He cradled. She felt his age, not as a number, but as layers. Storms he'd ridden, stars he'd watched flare and fade. The crushing weight of centuries in a prison of obsidian. The sharp, startling brightness of her laugh the first time he'd teased her about stubbornness. She felt his fear, not of the wells, not of unraveling, of her, of choosing and being rejected, of daring to imagine a life shared and having it taken away. Sahira's breath hitched, though she had no lungs here. He loves me, she thought, the realization ringing through her like a bell. Not in the way ballads described, not with grand declarations and swooning. His love was careful, devout, full of arguments and small, thoughtful concessions. It was built out of the way he watched her hands when she traced runes, the way he stepped back when he sensed her overwhelm, the way he always made her choice the hinge of his plans. The knowledge terrified her. It also made something in her, long quiet, sit up and listen. She reached back along the tether, not with words but with feeling. I see you, she thought, not as a prophecy, as a person. His essence shivered around her, startled and raw. The wells crashed in. They pressed against her awareness, vast and searching. They tasted her fears, her doubts, her anger at cages dressed as kindness. They tasted her late nights in the archives, her thrill at discovering a new marginal note, her bone-deep need to understand the systems that governed her world. They tasted the moment she had knelt before the obsidian pillar and whispered, "You're beautiful," and meant it, not just about the stone, but about the idea of a law she could read clearly without hidden clauses. They tasted Razan, intertwined with her now, his defiance, his tenderness, his willingness to be less powerful if it meant others could be more free. They tasted Ramil too, his frantic ambition, his belief that control was the only bulwark against chaos. His shards cut against their patterns like jagged glass. The wells quivered, caught between models. Sahira groped for words, for structure. You built the first law out of fear, she thought at them, forcing clarity into her mental voice. Fear of Djinn, fear of mortals, fear of imbalance. It worked, for a while, but it rotted,
It turned protection into coercion. You can see that. You've seen it for centuries. Images surged in answer, unhappy unions, bindings that saved cities at the cost of lives twisted beyond recognition, guardians enforcing directives long after their context had faded. You can't just patch it, she thought. You can't graft new roots onto a rotten root. You need a new root. Ramil's shard flared, trying to wedge itself into her argument. His conviction pressed in. Chaos is worse. People are foolish. They need someone to decide for them. Sahira's jaw clenched. Control that harms is not stability, she countered. It's just a slower kind of destruction. You think I don't understand that? I've spent my life reading what fear does to history. It erases.
It distorts. It turns people into footnotes. She pushed, harder now, drawing on everything she knew, every scroll she'd copied, every marginal note she'd argued with, every late-night conversation with Ehani about ethics and power. Write a law that respects people, she thought. All people, jinn and mortal. A bond should only be empowered by the wells if both parties choose it, freely and repeatedly. If either withdraws that choice, the law should let them go without punishing them for changing. She felt Razan's essence wrap tighter around hers, supporting, amplifying, his agreement a warm hum. I am willing, he thought at the wells. Test this on me. Bind me to her with this new model. See if I become the monster you fear. The wells hesitated. Stability, they pressed. Balance, risk. Everything worth keeping is a risk, Sahira shot back. Even your first law was a risk. You gambled on cages, now gamble on doors. Ramel's shard screamed, its runes blazing with frantic resistance. You don't understand what you're throwing away, his pattern insisted. Structure, predictability, authority. Sahira reached for him, not physically, but along the tangled web of law. Ramel, she thought, stop. This isn't how you become important. This is how you become a warning in some future scroll. His essence flickered, startled. You never respected me, he thought back, bitterness sharp enough to sting. You always had mentors, support, a place in the archives. I had to claw for every scrap. So you're going to claw your way into the center of the wells and chain everyone to your fear? She demanded. That's your legacy? The shard in his hand cracked. The wells trembled, pulled between patterns. For a terrifying second, Sahira felt the entire framework of magic shudder as if it might collapse. Razan's essence tightened around hers, anchoring. Choose, he thought to the wells. Not which of us to empower. Which version of yourselves you want to be. The wells shrank, not in size, but in focus. Their vastness narrowed, like a lens tightening. Sahira felt their attention sharpen on one thing, the tether between herself and Razan. Potential radiated from that link, not just for love, not just for power, but for something deeper, a model of relationship where power flowed both ways. Where law curved around choice instead of crushing it. Consent-based binding, the wells pulsed, the concept solidifying. Revocable, mutual, structured. They reached for the tether. Sahira's breath caught. This is it, Razan thought to her, his mental voice soft. Last chance to step away. She almost did. Fear is clever. It whispered of regrets, of futures where they grew apart, of bindings that chafed. It showed her images of herself years from now, wondering what might have been if she'd walked away. Then, quietly, another thought rose. If I walk away now, I'll always wonder what could have been if I'd stayed. In the end, her choice was not a grand, dramatic surge. It was a small, steady opening. She turned fully toward Razan along the tether, letting the wells feel her decision. Yes, she thought, not to prophecy, to him, to this. Razan's essence flared around hers, bright and fierce and tender. Then the wells wove. Light crashed through the tether, restructuring it. For a heartbeat, Sahira felt everything. Razan's essence braided with hers, the new law writing itself around their connection, clauses and conditions forming like crystalline lattices. Mutual consent required. Either party may withdraw. No compulsion permitted. Power shared, not hoarded. The shard in Ramil's hand shrieked as the new law rejected its old directives. Cracks spiderwebbed across its surface. It shattered, fragments dissolving into the liquid of the pool like ink dropped into water. Ramil screamed, not in pain, but in something like existential terror, as the patterns he'd clung to unraveled around him. The wells did not accept his structure. They did not erase him either. They let his essence go, smaller, humbled, no longer at the center. Then, abruptly, the tether snapped back into her body. The plateau slammed into focus. Her knees buckled. She caught herself on her hands, breath ragged, the buzzing in her bones now a low, steady tone instead of a frantic shriek. The well's construct had changed. It was still a figure of light, but its edges were softer, less imposing. Lines of script, new script, ran across its surface, glowing gold-white instead of cold blue. It inclined its head to her, to Razan. Revision accepted, the impression came, calmer now. New framework instantiated. Consent required. Bonds revocable. Sahira let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Razan swayed. His form flickered wildly, then steadied. The translucence was still there, but it no longer felt like fraying. It felt thinner, yes, but more coherent, as if the wells had pulled him taut instead of leaving him to unravel. He looked at his hands, flexed them. Light glowed along the lines of his fingers, warmer than before. "Well," she croaked, "are you alive?" He looked up at her and smiled, tired and bright. "And the tether?" He stepped closer, hesitated, then reached out. His fingers brushed her wrist. Warmth flooded the contact, not overwhelming, not consuming, just present, attuned. "Different," he said softly, "stronger and looser. I can feel you clearly, and I can feel the places where, if either of us chose, we could unhook." "Is that supposed to be reassuring?" she asked. "Yes," he said, "because it means we are not trapped. We are choosing every moment we stay linked." Her throat tightened. "And you're okay with that? With me having that power over you?" He shook his head. "It is not power over.
It is power with." She stared at him, at the warmth in his eyes, at the way his shoulders had relaxed for the first time since she'd broken the seal. Then her legs gave out entirely. He lunged forward, catching her before she hit the stone, gathering her gently against his chest. This time, when his arms wrapped around her, she felt the tether hum with approval, not as law, but as something like satisfaction. "Easy," he murmured. "You did more than any mortal has in centuries." "Argued with a puddle," she mumbled into his robe. "A cosmic, law-bearing puddle," he corrected. She laughed weakly, then froze as she realized how tightly she was holding on to him. Her arms were around his waist, her face pressed against the solid warmth of his chest. His hand was at the back of her head, fingers threading lightly through her hair in a gesture so instinctive it made her heart stumble. She should have pulled away. She didn't. For the first time, touching him felt simple. Not like crossing a line into destiny, not like stepping off a cliff. Just like leaning into someone she trusted when the world had been too loud. "We should check on the others," she said after a moment, voice muffled. "In a moment," he murmured. His hand rested between her shoulder blades, a steady, grounding weight. "They are intact. The wells did not overreach." "Ramil?" she asked. Razan's chest rose and fell against her cheek. "Smaller," he said. "Sadder. He is alive, but his hold on the old law is gone.
He will have to rebuild his identity without it. She pulled back just enough to look up at him. "Do you pity him?" "Yes," Razan said. "And I do not trust him any more than before. Both can be true." Sahira's gaze flicked to the glowing pool. The liquid was calmer now, its surface smooth. When she looked into it, she still saw fragments of herself, but they felt more optional, paths, not rails. The well's construct dimmed, then dissolved back into the pool, leaving only the new script glowing faintly along the channels that fed into it. The plateau was quiet. Then, as if some invisible thread had snapped, sound rushed back. The murmur of the caravan, the soft clack of Galim's staff, the rustle of robes. Slowly, people began to approach. Galim stopped a few paces away, eyes wide, face lined with awe and exhaustion. "What did you do?" he asked hoarsely. Sahira let go of Razan completely, swaying a little as she stood on her own. "Rewrote a small part of how the world works," she said, voice faint but steady. Galim let out a breath that might have contained a laugh. "If the council ever asks why our charts are late," he said, "I'm going to tell them that." Raimel approached more slowly, shoulders hunched, eyes hollow. The arrogance that had spiked his posture for as long as Sahira had known him was gone. He looked at the shattered shard fragments dissolving in the pool, then at Sahira, then at Razan. "I was wrong," he said, voice rough. Sahira blinked. "About everything," he said. "Not about the dangers, those are real, but about control, about thinking it should be mine. I thought if I could shape the law, I could matter. I didn't see how much I was turning into the thing I claimed to fear." Sahira studied him. "And now?" "And now," he said, "I'm going to spend a very long time copying scrolls quietly until I understand why I made every choice that led me here." "That's a very archivist penance," Razan murmured. Ramil managed a humorless smile. It seemed appropriate. He looked at Sahira again, meeting her eyes properly this time. "For what it's worth," he said, "I'm glad the wells listened to you instead of me." She nodded slowly. "So am I." The air around them felt different now, lighter but not weightless. The hum beneath their feet had settled into a steady, soothing vibration. Razan tilted his head as if listening to something only he could hear. "The oasis is open," he said softly, "fully." "And you?" she asked. "Can you do what you came here to do? Mend your essence?" He inhaled deeply, eyes closing. "It has already begun," he said. "The law accepted our bond as its first template. The wells have anchored me to that. My fading has slowed. With time, I can regain enough to exist without ripping storms through the desert whenever I sneeze." "That's a horrifyingly specific example," she said. "I have a vivid imagination," he replied. The corners of her mouth twitched. Galim cleared his throat. "And for the rest of us, what changes?" "Bindings will feel different," Razan said. "Contracts that rely on the well's power will check in periodically. The law will ask both parties if they are still willing. Some old bonds may loosen, some may strengthen. There will be adjustments." "That's going to annoy a lot of merchants," Galim said. "It may also save many apprentices," Sahira murmured. Razan's eyes warmed. "Yes, that." The sun had moved lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the plateau. The caravan needed rest. The oasis offered shelter, but not in the way villages did. The work of making camp still lay ahead. "Go," Razan said softly to Galim. "See to your people. The worst is past." Galim nodded slowly, then bowed, to both of them, surprisingly deeply. "We'll talk later, when my brain works again." He herded the others gently away, leaving Sahira and Razan near the pool. Silence settled again, but it felt different now, less like the hush before a storm, more like the pause after something important had been said. "So," Sahira said, because if she didn't speak, she was going to start thinking too loudly. "We did it."
"We changed a law older than either of us. We nearly broke the world. How's your day going?" "Exhausting," Razan said. "Satisfying, terrifying." "Same," she admitted. He turned to face her fully. "Sahira," he said quietly, "you made your choice in there, at the wells." "Yes," she said. "I know." "You chose a bond," he said, "with me, knowing you could walk away." "Yes," she said again, throat tight. "I will not ask you to label it," he said. "Not yet, not when everything is still echoing. But I need you to know." He paused, searching for the right words. "I will not hold you to that moment as if it were a final verdict. The law will. The law will treat it as a template. But, Razan," she interrupted gently, "look at me." He did. "I didn't choose you because the wells were watching," she said, "or because the world needed a better law. I chose you because somewhere between arguing with guardians and watching you nearly dissolve in front of me, I realized I didn't want a future that didn't at least try to include you." Emotion flickered across his face, raw and unguarded. "That doesn't mean I know what it will look like," she went on quickly, "or that I'm ready to declare undying anything. I'm still me. I still overthink. I will probably want to write terms and conditions for every part of this." "I would expect nothing less," he murmured. "But," she said, heart hammering, "for now, for this act, as Ehani would say, I am willing to see what we can build together." The word hung between them, simple and enormous. Willing. Razan's shoulders lowered, as if some ancient tension had finally eased. "Then," he said softly, "so am I." He held out his hand, palm up. Not a command, not a claim, an invitation. Sahira looked at it, at the faint glow along his fingers, at the way the tether hummed gently between them like a plucked string. Her own hand trembled as she lifted it. When she placed her palm against his, the contact felt both familiar and startlingly new. There was no jolt, no surge, no overwhelming heat, just warmth, presence, a sense of something settling into its proper shape. The wells hummed approval, but faint now, distant. The law had been written. It would not intrude on this part. This part was theirs. They stood like that for a moment, hands joined, the pool's soft light reflecting in their faces, the newly rewritten magic humming quietly under their feet. For the first time since she had brushed dust from an obsidian seal and changed her life, Sahira felt something close to peace. It was tenuous, fragile, full of unanswered questions. It was also very real. The days that followed felt quieter, even though nothing about the world was actually simple again. The caravan remained near the outer pools of the celestial oasis while people and animals recovered. There were no walls here, no village streets, just a wide basin of stone and sand threaded with channels of liquid light and scattered stands of hardy silver-leaved shrubs that somehow thrived on essence-soaked water. At dawn, mist curled low over the ground. At night, the pools glowed softly, as if storing stray starlight. Sahira spent the first 2 mornings half convinced she'd dreamed it all. Then she'd roll over on her mat, see Razan sitting cross-legged nearby with his hands resting lightly on his knees, eyes closed in that not-quite-sleep state of his, faint gold threads of light trailing from him toward the nearest channel, and remember. "You're drawing from it?" she asked on the second morning, propping herself up on her elbows. "Gently," he said, without opening his eyes. "I am attached to the wells now through the new law. It's like breathing thinner air. I can't gulp essence the way I used to, but I can take what I need to steady myself." "Does it hurt?" she asked. "Less each day," he said. "The fraying is mending, slowly." She watched him for a moment. His form still wasn't as solid as it had been in Kasira's ruins, but the flickering had smoothed. The edges of him felt less like they were dissolving and more like they had simply chosen to be softer. "Good," she said quietly. "It would be very annoying if I rewrote law for someone who then evaporated." His mouth twitched. "You did not rewrite it." "No," she said, "but I'm allowed to care how you're doing anyway." He opened his eyes at that, and the warmth in them made something in her chest flutter uncomfortably. "I am glad you do," he said. News from beyond the oasis took its time reaching them, but it came. A messenger caravan arrived on the third day, their leader pale and shaken. "Contracts are talking," he said, after Sahira and Ghalim coaxed it out of him over spiced tea. "Binding oaths, debt markers, apprenticeship seals, all of them, they're checking in." "Checking in," Sahira repeated. "At first we thought it was some mass hex," the man said, rubbing his face. "Apprentices felt this tug in their chest and heard words in their heads. Do you still agree? Masters felt it too. Some of the oaths loosened, others tightened. People who'd stayed in arrangements they hated suddenly weren't held anymore." Ghalim glanced at Razan. "You're doing?" "Ours," Razan corrected softly. "The wells enforce the new law wherever their essence anchors binding. It will take time to filter everywhere, generations perhaps, for all the old structures to adapt, but the process has begun." "Some people are furious," the messenger added. "Others are weeping with relief. And the priests in the capital are arguing themselves hoarse about whether this is a miracle or a catastrophe." "Sounds like a normal week in the capital," Sahira said. The messenger stared at her. "You did something, didn't you?" "That seems like the kind of dangerous question that should remain rhetorical," she said mildly. He wisely dropped it. Ramil stayed mostly quiet. He helped with practical tasks, hauling water, repairing harnesses, copying down new observations when Sahira's hand cramped. He didn't reach for leadership, didn't argue over route choices. The sharp edge of his voice had dulled. Once, Sahira found him sitting on a flat rock near one of the smaller pools, watching the light shift in its depths. "You're going to throw yourself in again?" she asked lightly. He startled. "Hardly. I've learned at least one lesson." "Only one?" He huffed a breath that was almost a laugh. "Fine, several. I'm still counting." She sat beside him, leaving a respectful space. "I didn't apologize properly," he said, staring at his hands, "for almost ruining everything, for trying to add my shard to your law." "It wasn't my law," she said. "That's the problem. It never should have belonged to any one person, or Djinn, or Wells." "I wanted it to belong to me," he admitted, voice thin. "Just a little. Enough that my name would matter." "It mattered already," she said. "Your papers, your work. You're good, Ramil. Stubborn and arrogant and insufferable, but good." He snorted. "High praise." "You don't need to be the engine of the world to leave a mark on it," she said. "You just need to be decent, consistent, useful." "That sounds terribly boring," he muttered. "Try it," she said. "You might like it." He went quiet. "Do you regret losing the shard's influence?" she asked. He thought about that longer than she expected. "No," he said finally. "It felt intoxicating. Having my ideas amplified like that, like everything I'd ever feared I wasn't, was suddenly true, important, needed. It would have eaten me alive." She nodded, staring at the ripples in the pool. "I am going back to Kasira when we're done here," he said. "If we're done here. I'm going to spend the next decade copying and not speaking unless spoken to." "That seems extreme," she said. "I know myself," he replied. "I need to recalibrate, learn when my voice is useful and when it's just noise." She didn't argue. "Instead," she said quietly, "when I present these findings to the council, carefully, in ways that don't make their heads explode, I'll include your notes from the Guardian fragments. Your name deserves to be in the margins, properly this time." His throat worked. "You don't have to do that." "I know," she said. "I want to." He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded once, abruptly, as if any more acknowledgement would break something fragile. The oasis was not all conversation and contemplation. There were still practicalities, rationing food until they could safely leave the well's dense influence, charting which paths going out were least likely to tangle caravans in essence pools, testing how far Razan could move before the new tether tugged. They discovered that last part by accident. Sahira was hunched over a channel, sketching the new script that had appeared along its edge, when a sharp ache bloomed just beneath her sternum. Not pain, more like the feeling of having walked away from a conversation that wasn't finished. She looked up sharply. Razan was not where she had left him. He was farther away, near the top of a ridge, speaking with Galeem and two of the caravan's navigators. As she watched, he stepped beyond a line of faintly glowing inlay. The ache sharpened. "Razan," she called. He turned. The moment his eyes met hers, the feeling eased, as if the tether had just needed to be acknowledged. He walked back down, brows lifting. "You felt that?" "Yes," she said. "Did you?" "A tug," he said, "like something reminding me I had forgotten my satchel." She exhaled slowly. "So, we can travel apart, but not too far, not without discomfort." "Noted," he said. "The law prefers us within each other's horizon." "That sounds like something out of a poem," she said. "Does it?" he asked lightly. "Perhaps I am developing unexpectedly artistic tendencies." "Blame the wells," she muttered. He smiled, and the ridge of worry in her chest melted a little. On the 7th day, they prepared to leave. The oasis did not have a border in the way villages did, but Razan identified the point where the well's influence thinned enough that the caravan could move more freely, without their bones buzzing. "We'll come back," Galeem said. "Maybe not with an entire caravan next time, but with a small group, scholars, priests, people who can help interpret." Sahira's stomach did a small, anxious flip at the thought of priests, but she nodded. "We'll need to be careful who we tell. Not everyone will respond well to the idea that the foundation of their authority just became negotiable." "Then we'll start with the ones who value integrity over tradition," Galeem said. "There are at least 3. "Out of how many?" she asked. He smiled wryly. "We work with what we have." Ehani met them halfway back to Shadif. Sahira saw her mentor's caravan long before Ehani could see them, their banners bright against the dunes. Her heart leapt. "You didn't really think I was going to sit in Kasira and wait for a report," Ehani said later, hands on her hips as she looked Sahira over with a mixture of outrage and relief.
Half the desert was buzzing with stories about storms that behaved oddly and oaths that started asking questions. I put 2 and 2 together and came up with you." Sahira laughed, then sobbed, then hugged her so tightly she nearly knocked them both into the sand. "You're all right," Ehani murmured into her hair. "As all right as someone who rewrote law can be." "Who told you that?" Sahira asked, pulling back. Ehani's mouth curved. "Let's just say the wells are not subtle when they are excited about a new project. Every binding rune in Kasira hummed for a full day. The archives haven't been that lively in years." "Oh no," Sahira groaned. "The council will never forgive me." "They will when they realize how many complaints about unjust contracts vanish in the next decade," Ehani said. Her eyes flicked over Sahira's shoulder. "And that," she said, lowering her voice, "must be the Djinn." Razan, who had been standing politely at a distance, inclined his head when Ehani's gaze met his. "Razan," he said, "it is an honor to meet the woman who taught Sahira everything she uses to argue with me." "Not everything," Ehani said dryly. "Some of that she was born with." "You must be very proud," Razan said. "I am also very tired," Ehani replied. "But yes, proud and curious." She studied him with the same evaluating look she used on new texts, deep, thorough, not unkind. "How are you treating her?" Ehani asked bluntly. Razan blinked. "With respect, with honesty, with occasional exasperation on both sides." "Good," Ehani said. If that changes, I know at least 3 ways to bind a djinn's eyebrows together with nothing but a brush and some ink. Razan's mouth twitched. I will endeavor to keep my behavior within acceptable parameters. Sahira buried her face in her hands. Please stop threatening each other on my behalf. Who's threatening? Ehani said. We're bonding. The merged caravans traveled together for the remaining distance to Kasira. It felt strange to return. Sahira had left the moving city as a scholar chasing whispers of djinn. She returned as someone whose name would eventually appear in law treatises and binding manuals, and, if Ghalim had his way, ballads. Absolutely not, she said when he joked about that. Oh, it's too late, he replied. I've already heard a snatch of a song from one of the camel drivers. The Scholar and the Sand Djinn. It scans surprisingly well. I will set every copy on fire, she muttered. Kasira itself didn't look different at first. Its great wagons and tent-covered platforms rolled slowly along their customary route, pulled by patient teams of beasts that could handle soft sand and stone with equal ease. Bright banners snapped in the wind. The smell of ink and dust and spices hung in the air.
But when Sahira stepped into the archives, she felt the change. The runes along the doorframe hummed softly as she passed. Not with disapproval, not with alarm, with recognition. Welcome home, they seemed to say. We have some questions. So, Ehani said later, as they sat on a stack of cushions in a corner of the main reading hall, scrolls piled around them. What will you do now? Sahira stared at her hands, at the faint, invisible line of warmth that marked where the tether ran through her. I don't know, she admitted. Part of me wants to hide in the deepest, dustiest archive and refuse to come out until everyone stops saying the word Narusa at me. That will take a while, Ehani said. I know, she sighed. Another part of me wants to start cataloging every change the new law makes, every loosened bond, every adjusted contract. See what patterns emerge, whether it truly helps more than it hurts. That sounds like you, Ehani said. Sensible, determined, mildly obsessive. And another part, Sahira said slowly, wants to see what life looks like when I'm not only reacting, when I'm choosing, actively, daily. Ehani's gaze softened. With him. Yes, Sahira said quietly, with him. Razan had given her space the first few days back, as promised. He'd attended a council session, under a carefully controlled illusion and with Ghalim as his sponsor, to demonstrate that yes, he existed, and no, he was not here to overthrow anyone. Then he'd simply been around. Sometimes she'd find him standing in awed silence under the archive's central skylight, watching dust motes spin in the beam. Sometimes he'd be in the scriptorium, politely asking a copyist what they thought of a particular phrasing. Once, she caught him helping a frazzled apprentice stack scrolls, each movement precise and gentle. He was fitting himself into her world, as much as she was learning to understand his. One evening, after the council had finished grilling Sahira on exactly how permanent this revision is, and whether the Wells can be petitioned to undo specific oaths they personally disliked, the answer to the second was no and stop asking, she climbed the narrow ladder to the archive roof. Razan was already there. He stood at the edge, looking out over Kasira's slow-moving sprawl. Lanterns glowed along its edges. The desert stretched beyond, dark and wide. You keep finding the highest spots, she said, crossing to stand beside him. I like perspective, he said, and stars, and the way your city looks like a beast with many legs from up here. It's everyone's city, she said. We just argue more loudly than most. That too, he said. They stood in comfortable silence for a while, the wind tugging lightly at their clothes.
How did the council session go? He asked. About as well as could be expected, she said. They're not pleased that the Wells now consider both parties in any binding agreement stakeholders. But they are pleased that we prevented several guardians from flattening Shadif, so they're conflicted. Good, he said. Conflicted minds are open minds. I'm holding you to that when they start drafting addenda, she said. He smiled, then sobered. Sahira, he said quietly, we have not had much time to talk about us. Her heart gave a small nervous jump. We've had quite a lot of time, she said. We were inside each other's minds while rewriting cosmic law. That was not subtle. That was necessary, he said. This is different. He turned to face her fully. When we stood at the wells, he said, you chose a bond with me, and I chose one with you. That choice is now a line in the law, but I do not want it to remain only that, a distant structural fact. I want to know what it means for us, in the small things. Like how often you're allowed to reorganize my scrolls? She asked weakly. His eyes warmed. That is a discussion for another evening. Good, she said, because the answer is never. He huffed a quiet laugh, then grew serious again. I want to walk with you, he said, to travel and return, to argue over footnotes, to help you map what the new law does, to be there when you are proud and when you are furious and when you are tired. I want to be part of your life, not as a destiny, as a habit, as a choice we keep making, even when it is inconvenient. Her throat tightened. That sounds like a lot of work. Yes, he said simply. Good things usually are. And if, she said slowly, someday I wake up and realize that the shape of my life needs to change again, that I need distance, that this bond, this shared work, hurts more than it helps, then we will talk. We will argue. We will grieve, perhaps. And if, after that, you still need distance, we will go to the wells and ask them to unbraid our tether. The law allows it. I insisted. You insisted? She echoed. Of course, he said. What kind of consent-based framework traps people when they change? Emotion swelled in her, messy, complicated, fierce. That terrifies me, she whispered. Knowing I could hurt you that much, that I have that power. I trust you with it, he said, because you fear it. The ones who do not fear their power are the ones who should never hold it. She closed her eyes briefly. When we were at the wells, she said, I felt everything. Your age, your loneliness, how it felt to be bound, how it felt to be seen for the first time in centuries. I felt, she swallowed, your love. For me. The word hung between them, fragile and solid all at once. Yes, he said softly. You did. You didn't say it, she added. I did not want to press it on you, he said, to make you feel you had to answer or reciprocate. It is mine to feel, yours to respond to or not. She opened her eyes. I can't say it yet, she admitted. Not because I don't feel something. I do, strongly. It's just big, and I am still me. I need time to grow into big words without feeling like I'm trying on someone else's robe. Relief flickered across his face, mingled with a tenderness that made her chest ache. I would not have you say it before you are ready, or ever if it does not fit. But, she said quietly, I can say this. I am glad it's you. If I had to anchor a new law to anyone, if I had to share my mind with anyone, if I had to walk into a future I can't fully chart with anyone, I'm glad it's you. He inhaled sharply, eyes closing for a moment. That, he said, voice rougher than she'd ever heard it, is enough. More than enough. Wind brushed past them, cool and dry. Somewhere down below, someone laughed, the sound drifting up along with the faint clink of cups and the murmur of arguments that had nothing to do with wells or guardians or law. You know, she said, grasping for lighter ground before she drowned in her own emotions,
The Wells still consider me their origin contact for the new framework. I'm going to be getting complaints, aren't I? Yes, he said, lips curving. People will petition you about their bindings. They will ask if the law can be tweaked. They will send you very long letters. She groaned. I've become the suggestion box for the universe. You can say no, he reminded her. Consent goes both ways, even for feedback. Tell that to the council, she muttered. I will, he said, with great joy. Despite herself, she laughed. Razan stepped a fraction closer. The tether hummed softly, pleased. May I? He asked quietly. She knew what he meant. Not law, not Wells, just this smaller, simpler request in the middle of everything else. She nodded. He lifted his hand and, very gently, tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered a heartbeat longer than necessary, tracing the line where hair met skin. The touch was light, barely there, yet her pulse leapt. He could have pulled her into his arms. He didn't. He simply stood there, close enough that the warmth of him brushed against the front of her robe, close enough that the desert breeze swirled around them, as if reluctant to pass between. Thank you, he said softly, for letting me be here. With you. Now. She tilted her head back, meeting his eyes. Thank you, she said, for not being what the stories said you would be. His smile deepened, slow and genuine. Then, he said quietly, we will keep writing new stories. Footnoted, she said. He laughed, low and warm. Of course, footnoted. They stayed on the rooftop until the stars were bright and Kasira's lanterns burned low, talking about small things. Which caravan routes would need new markers? Which contracts in Kasira were already humming with questions? What spices the tea vendor on the third wagon used that made his brews taste like safety? Later, when Sahira lay in her narrow archive bed, with scrolls piled on every available surface, she felt the tether hum faintly, like a heartbeat slightly out of sync with her own. She could, if she wished, close her eyes and lean into it, and feel Razan's presence, calm, steady, familiar, as he drifted somewhere nearby, listening to starlight. She could also let the hum sit in the background, like the soft creak of shelves and the distant murmur of scribes, a part of her world, but not all of it. That was the quiet miracle of what they had done. Not that they had changed the Wells, not that contracts now asked questions, but that her future, however tangled, however unpredictable, no longer felt like a script carved by someone else's hand. It felt like a series of doors. Some she would close, some she would open, some she would stand in for a very long time, arguing with herself before walking through. And one, at least, she knew she would keep open, as long as it made sense, as long as it felt like this, like warmth and arguments and shared responsibility and the steady, attentive presence of a djinn who had chosen to challenge fate for her. Somewhere in the vast quiet above the desert, the wells turned, their patterns subtly altered. Somewhere in the slow-moving bones of Kasira, old runes hummed softly, adjusting. And somewhere just beyond the archive wall, Razan sat with his back against warm stone, eyes half closed, listening to the same wind that slipped in through her window. Their bond was not a chain. It was a path. And for now, for today, Sahira Namir walked it willingly, knowing that at any point she could stop, turn, choose again. That knowledge didn't lessen the weight of her choice. It made it sweeter.